caught up rather quickly. The next thing I know, John's contacted me, and he's talking about, I think that he got in this whole thing about, it was started actually back in the 70s with Michael Eddowes, about the fact that there appeared to be so many discrepancies in the description and the physical characteristics of Oswald that it appeared that there may have been two Oswalds. So John comes to me and starts talking about these two Oswalds, who he has now labeled Lee and Harvey to separate the two. And I was going out and that's great, okay, sure, all right, because it really sounded far out. But then coup d'etat in the United States sounded pretty far out back in 1970, all right? John kept working, kept dogging the trail, and came up with so much information that pretty soon I was going, I believe the boy's onto something. And then he kept coming up with more and more and more, and so I just want to say that I think you should pay close attention here, because I think the scenario that John Armstrong can present to you, while maybe not 100% on the target, is close enough that it may fill in the gaps and the inconsistencies that we've all been plagued with over the years. And without further ado, let me introduce John Armstrong and his presentation of Lee and Harvey.
Good evening. Well, I've got a lot to cover. Sorry it's going to take so long to do it, but there's just a lot of information. So I'm going to get started. We'll have a couple of breaks. I'll be around all day tomorrow if you have any questions. Okay. In 1961, the arrest of Gordon Lonsdale provided a rare opportunity for the public to gain insight into the world of espionage. Lonsdale had immigrated from Canada to England, established a business, and began passing British defense secrets to the Russians. Lonsdale and 4 members of his spy ring were arrested, tried, and convicted of espionage. As they delved into Lonsdale's background, they quickly realized he was no ordinary spy. He had fake birth certificates, fake passports, and dual identities. To the surprise of the British, he was not a Canadian, but a native-born Russian who spoke English perfectly. His real name was Conan Molodai, born in Russia in 1922. He was sent to California at age 9, where he lived with his aunt, attended school, and mastered the English language. 9 years later, he was recalled to the Soviet Union and trained in espionage. In 1954, Conan Molodai was sent to Canada, where he assumed the identity of a deceased Canadian named Gordon Lonsdale. A year later, he was in England, posing as a British businessman, but his real purpose was spying out British defense secrets. If the KGB recruited young boys, can there be any doubt that our intelligence agencies ran similar operations? In the early 1950s, an intelligence operation was underway that involved 2 teenage boys, Lee Oswald from Fort Worth, and a Russian-speaking boy named Harvey Oswald from New York. Beginning in 1952, these boys lived parallel but separate lives, often in the same city. The ultimate goal was to switch their identities and send Harvey Oswald into Russia, which is exactly what happened 7 years later. Lee and Harvey attended different schools, worked at different companies, and lived in different cities. When the Warren Commission pieced together Lee Harvey Oswald's life, they found evidence of Oswald in 2 places at the same time. Unable to explain these conflicts, they withheld it from their report. This evidence is the key to understanding the lives of Harvey and Lee Oswald. Mrs. Jack Tippet of West Forest, Connecticut, was telephoned shortly after the assassination. The woman knew the Tippets were related to Officer J.D. Tippet and wanted Mrs. Tippet to relay that information she had to people in Dallas. The woman would not identify herself because she was afraid of being killed. She said she personally knew Oswald's father and uncle. They came from Hungary and lived at 77th and 2nd Avenue in New York. They were unemployed, received money from communists, and spent all their time on communist activities. She gave 2 names, Louis Weinstock and Emil Cardos. If this information is correct, one of the Oswalds lived in New York in his youth. This could explain Oswald's interest in communism from his father and his uncle, which began as a teenager and continued throughout his life. It could also be the reason for Margaret Oswald's sudden trip to New York City. In 1952, in Fort Worth, Texas, 12-year-old Lee Oswald was in the 6th grade. Classmate Richard Garrett told Life magazine, "Lee was the tallest, most dominant member of our group." This 6th grade photo shows Oswald to be the tall, well-built kid described by Garrett. In August 1952, Marguerite drove with Lee to New York. Although allegedly quite poor, she hired Louise Robertson as a housekeeper. Marguerite told Mrs. Robertson that she had brought Lee to New York to have mental tests done at Jacobi Hospital. Marguerite was asked about this by Warren Commission Attorney Rankin, but avoided his question. This slide shows Lee Oswald's activities while in New York. During the year and a half Lee Oswald resided in New York, there are few records of his activities. His New York school records contradict New York court records and the testimony of Lee Oswald's brother, John Pick. The Warren Commission record tells us Oswald first entered Trinity Evangelical School in the Bronx in September 1952, many miles from his residence in Manhattan. When asked for copies of Oswald's school records, the Trinity School allegedly told the FBI they did not maintain records until 1957. This is nonsense. Who ever heard of a school that did not maintain records? If the school did not maintain records, how were the dates of his attendance at Trinity obtained? How did the FBI even know he attended Trinity? And why would 12-year-old Oswald attend junior high in the Bronx instead of Manhattan? John Pick, Lee Oswald's older half-brother, remembers Lee's school enrollment differently. Pick was certainly attended school 2 blocks from his Manhattan apartment. Lee pointed out that both whites and Negroes attended the same classes together, something he had not yet experienced. Yet there is no Warren Commission record of Lee's attendance at any school near the Pick's apartment. In the fall of 1952, Oswald attended only 24 days of school. This truancy brought him to the attention of court psychiatrist Dr. Milton Curian. Dr. Curian interviewed Oswald, read the court file, and noted Oswald's recent stay at the youth house. Dr. Curian was 5'7" and described Oswald as being very small for his age, around 4'6". Yet Lee Oswald measured 5'4", according to his New York health records. His height was again measured at 5'4", 4 months later in New York, tall for a 13-year-old boy. When I informed Dr. Curian, who lives in Massachusetts, that Oswald's height was listed as 5'4" in the New York school records, Dr. Curian stated, "Those records must be wrong. He was a little fellow, no taller than the middle of my chest, perhaps 4'6" tall." When Dr. Curian interviewed Oswald on March 27, 1953, Oswald's file showed previous confinement at the youth house. But Warren Commission records tell us Oswald's first and only placement at the youth house began 3 weeks after Dr. Curian saw Oswald. The Warren Commission tells us Oswald attended 24 days of school through May 1953. Yet Warren Commission Exhibit 1384 shows him attending 109 days of school at the same time. Which Warren Commission record are we to believe? If both records are accurate, these records are for 2 different Oswalds. While Oswald was at the youth house, his mother went to meet with probation officer John Carl. Marguerite told Carl she was the youngest of 6 children. Yet there were 5 children in the Clavery family. She gave Lee Oswald's father's name as Robert Lee Harvey, when his real name was Robert Edward Lee Oswald. She said Lee's father died at age 45. He died at 41. She gave her marriage date as July 19, 1929, yet she married Robert Oswald in 1933. She gave her sister's name as Lillian Segori, when we know her sister's name was Lillian Moret. She said she formerly owned a house in Corning, Texas, yet there's not a Corning, Texas, never has been. She gave Lee Oswald's birthday as October 19th, when the correct date was October 18th. She said Lee was baptized at Trinity Lutheran Church in New Orleans, when the records show he was baptized at the Redeemer Lutheran Church. When she was asked whether Lee's father was right or left-handed, she replied, "I do not remember, sir." There's just no reason for a 45-year-old woman to make these kind of errors about her background. The Carl testimony, the Carl interview with Marguerite, and all of what I have told you is in the Warren volumes. Had she forgotten? Was she lying? Or was this person really Lee's mother? Assistant FBI Director John Malone reviewed the 1953 court file on Oswald. Malone filed this 8-page report and stated when Lee Oswald left the youth house on May 7th, He entered public school 44 in the 9th grade. The 9th grade? Oswald entered the 7th grade the previous September and attended only 24 days of school. How in the world could he have skipped from the 7th to the 9th grade? Warren Commission exhibits, court records, Pick's testimony, and Dr. Curian's observation of Oswald strongly suggest there were two different people, both named Oswald, in New York in the spring of 1953. This would explain John Pick's testimony when he showed a series of photographs from the Life magazine issue of February 21st, 1964. These photographs were of Lee Oswald as a youth. Pick identified the photographs of Oswald from 2 to age 12. But when Pick was shown this photograph, he said, the one on the right, "Sir, from that photograph, I could not recognize that is Lee Harvey Oswald." Jenner said, "That fellow is shown here, he doesn't look like you recall Lee looked in 1952 and 53 when you saw him in New York City?" Pick replied, "No, sir." In the summer of 1953, Lee Oswald was living in the Bronx with his mother. Let me clarify something here. Throughout this presentation, most of what I say about Lee Oswald will be on the screen on the left. Most of what I say about Harvey will be on the screen on the right. In the summer of 1953, Lee Oswald was living in the Bronx with his mother, who was employed at Lady Orva Hosiery. At the same time, Harvey Oswald was residing in North Dakota. After the assassination, Mrs. Alma Cole wrote this letter to President Johnson, informing him that her son, William Henry Timmer, had befriended Oswald at Stanley, North Dakota in 1953. Timmer told of meeting a boy in the city park who introduced himself as Harvey Oswald. This is the first known reference to Harvey Oswald, the person who would eventually assume the identity of Lee Oswald. Harvey spent a lot of time with Timmer during the next 2 months, the summer of 1953. They went swimming at the reservoir, rode bikes at the city park. Timmer was impressed by this kid from the big city who talked of gang fights in New York and of making weapons with razor blades stuck in potatoes. Harvey said he had been all over the country. Harvey carried a pamphlet in his back pocket, and on one occasion he showed it to Timmer and remarked, "I'll bet you've never seen anything like this." It was a pamphlet on Marxism. Where would he get such a pamphlet? From his father and his uncle, who were, according to the woman who spoke with Mrs. Tippet, Hungarians and spent all their time on communist activities. These people may have acted like communists, but in reality, they were probably agents provocateurs, and their mission was to uncover and identify domestic communists. Oswald told Eileen Mosby in 1959 in Moscow that after living in New York City, quote, "We moved to North Dakota." Mosby's interview appeared in newspaper articles in 1959 and is mentioned in FBI reports. When Oswald was arrested in August 1963 in New Orleans, he was interviewed by Lieutenant Francis Martello. He told Martello that he had moved from New York City to North Dakota. Clearly, someone named Harvey Oswald was in North Dakota in the summer of 1953. I think we need to advance the slides a couple. On the right. One more. Okay. In the fall of 1953, Oswald entered the 8th grade of Public School 44 in the Bronx. Marguerite Oswald again met with probation officer John Carl. When Carl reminded her that Lee was still under court supervision, she told Carl that he no longer needed court supervision. He was doing much better and claimed he had been elected president of his 9th grade class. Two references to Oswald in the 9th grade, one by Marguerite Oswald, the other by Assistant FBI Director John Malone, who obtained his information from Judge Kelly's court file. How Oswald was able to advance from the 7th to the 8th grade while attending only 24 days of school has never been explained. Also unexplained are the continual references to Oswald being in the 9th grade. It should be easy to determine which grade Lee Oswald attended during 1953. There are grammar school report cards, student lists, enrollment forms, personal photos, class photos, and interviews with teachers, students, and friends. Yet when we try to find similar records in New York, we find almost nothing. Not one report card, not one student list, no enrollment forms, no interviews, nor even the names of his teachers, no names of students, neighbors, and only one photograph. A photograph which his brother, John Pick, says it's not Lee Oswald. The FBI took down the names of every student who shared Oswald's homeroom and intended to locate them. Yet not a single New York student was interviewed. Here we have two contradictory Warren Commission exhibits. The top one, highlighted in yellow, shows Oswald attended Beauregard for 89 days. That's Harvey, in the fall term of 1953 in New Orleans. 89 days. It's right over there. This is the 1953-54 school year. The yellow line is the fall term. 53-54 is the spring term. 53-54 is the yearly average. The bottom record shows Oswald attended 62 days of school during the fall term of 1953 in New York. If both of these Warren Commission documents are correct, you have two Oswalds, Lee in New York, Harvey in New Orleans, fall of 1953. Lee Oswald, the 5'4" Southern boy, moved to New York in 1962 and was teased by his classmates for his Southern accent and for wearing blue jeans. Harvey, who lived in New York, was the 4'6" kid interviewed by Dr. Tyrion, photographed at the Bronx Zoo, and unrecognized by John Pitt. Harvey moved to North Dakota in the summer of 1953, then to New Orleans, where he was teased for his New York accent and attacked while sitting in the back of a bus with Negroes. Harvey enrolled at Beauregard Junior High and was assigned to Myra Drews' 8th grade homeroom. On his first day at school, he told Myra he wanted to call Harvey. Myra's memory of 4'6" Harvey is consistent with Dr. Tyrion's observation of Oswald a few months earlier. During Myra's 30-year teaching career, her only homeroom was during the 53-54 school year, and she became friends with Harvey Oswald in the spring as local. If you turn the slide projector off. Not yours, yes.
My name is Willie, and I began teaching school in Orleans Parish in 1953 September. And my school that I was assigned to was Beauregard High School, which is located on Canal Street. I was physical education teacher. My second year there, I was given a homeroom. And I wrote my roll call. I really tried to get her on the stage in the basement. Sometime after Christmas, I got a new student. It turned out that his name was Lee Harvey Oswald. I never called him Lee Harvey Oswald because he was not calling me. I see what he likes to be called Mr. Harvey. So I knew him as Harvey Oswald. The contact with him was just in a home roll call. Because I was so nervous to play it. Sometimes, how it happened, I don't know. He and I became friends. And he dropped me as I did my coaching after school. He always seemed to be in love. And he would come over, and that is about the only person that I really saw Harvey socializing with me. Another thing, when we were practicing basketball in the schoolyard, that's when we got the yard and said, Mr. Lewis, come inside quick. So that I was led to the teacher and I went into the basement, and there on the floor was Harvey with an upright piano that had fallen. And he stood out his legs and got the legs down along the piano. So Harvey and I with the help of the legs pulled the piano up. And I asked him if he would hurt me. taking bad coffee, she was hurt. He said, well, he didn't think so. Well, I said, well, maybe you should call him up. He said, no. He said, what? Well, you know, this happened at school, we didn't do too fast, so I called our principal, Mr. McBride. And that's what I should do. And he said, well, now, take him down to my way. I said, but that's still the only thing. Well, about an hour east of the school in Canal Street. So we got in the car and I drove Paul down and they said he's fine. As we get started, it was outside. So I didn't want to do it one by himself. So I said, he didn't look, he said he didn't understand that. Not he do it. So I drove it down, and it was really a kind of disgusting place. And I was walking where I was sitting, and he lived upstairs over a bottle. Well, I'm about 5'3" now, but I was 5'4" at that time. And I would say he came up to about here. I would say he was really shortly. He was 40. That's small. Yes, he was little. Funny.
In February 1954, Myra drove Harvey home to exchange hours. Lee Oswald and his mother were then renting an apartment at 1454 St. Mary's from Marguerite's best friend, Myrtle Evans, some 2 miles away. When school resumed in the fall of 1954, Myra Drews no longer had a homeroom class and lost contact with Harvey. Harvey, now in the 9th grade, moved to Fort Worth, where he attended Strickland Junior High. Lee Oswald entered the 9th grade at Beauregard. Lee, New Orleans, Harvey, Fort Worth. As Lowell told the Warren Commission, he first met Lee Oswald when Oswald fought with Johnny Newmeyer. After the fight, Vogel got some ice for Lee and attempted to patch him up. Vogel told the Warren Commission, which is volume 8, page 3, Oswald's lip was cut and his tooth was knocked out. Shortly after the fight, in November 1954, Vogel took this Life magazine photograph of Lee Oswald showing the missing front tooth. But in 1981, when Oswald's body was exhumed, autopsied, photographed, and x-rayed, there were no missing or chipped teeth. The boy in the Life magazine photograph, one more. There's your natural front teeth. That's Harvey. That's Lee. The boy in the Life magazine photo with the missing tooth was not the person killed by Jack Ruby and autopsied in 1981. When I showed the Life magazine photo to Myra, the one on the left, she said, this was not the Harvey Oswald she knew. Myra was correct. This was Lee Oswald. Ed Vogel, unfortunately, knew Harvey Oswald in the 8th grade and Lee Oswald in the 9th grade. The House Select Committee was quite interested in talking to Vogel. However, Vogel died a few years earlier at age 31 in New Orleans at the Oshna Clinic. While Lee Oswald and Vogel attended 9th grade at Beauregard in 1954-55 school year, Harvey attended W.C. Strickland in Fort Worth. Francina Schubert was in the 8th grade in the 1954-55 school year. Fran remembers Oswald being a grade ahead of her.
Someone from the FBI will be there to pick them up. That's exactly what I did.
That's all right. Who was the friend?
from the bedside number one, I did open the envelope, something, and they turned me and they left it, and I locked the door down.
Okay, let's look at your friend now. The address she's referring to is 222 Old Thomas Place, where Oswald's mother lived at the time of the assassination. That was 9 years earlier, when he attended Strickland in 1952. Frank watched Oswald walk home during lunch periods and discussed him with his girlfriend. She said that the Oswald lived at 222 Old Thomas Place, across the street from the school, the same house Mark lived in. In October 1959, when Oswald defected to Russia, Robert Oswald was interviewed for the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. Robert said his brother had attended Strickland in Fort Worth. In June 1962, when Harvey Oswald returned from Russia, Robert Oswald again was interviewed for the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, again stating his brother had attended Strickland in Fort Worth. 2 years later, Robert Oswald told the Warren Commission his brother attended Strickland Junior High in Fort Worth. When Marjorie was interviewed by Mr. Tippet in 1964, she said he had gone to junior high in Fort Worth. Here we have 4 statements over a 5-year period that Oswald attended Strickland Junior High. But he couldn't have. He graduated from Beauregard. The FBI had Oswald New York and New Orleans school records. This 1955 graduation photo from Beauregard was in their file within hours after the assassination. Oswald attended Strickland Junior High in Fort Worth at the same time created a big problem. Their information about Strickland probably came from FBI agent John Fane. From 1952 to 1963, Fane lived at 1727 Thomas Place, 5 blocks from the Oswald. It was Fane's 1960 dinner to his Marguerite that prompted Hoover to notify the State Department that an imposter may be using Oswald's birth certificate. Hoover knew about to Oswald in 1960 and was again aware to Oswald in 1961 when Lee Oswald tried to buy trucks to send to Cuba from Molten Fort in New Orleans. Harvey was in Russia at this time. Oswald's 1954 attendance to Strickland Junior High in Fort Worth was unexplainable. So the day after the assassination, Saturday at 8 o'clock in the morning, the FBI went to Strickland to pick up Oswald's junior high school records. 2 FBI agents were met by Mr. Frank Cudlitz, the assistant principal at Strickland. Cudlitz is the fellow that you previously saw in the video. Frank looked through Oswald's file and noticed that Oswald had attended not quite a semester in the 9th grade. Marguerite worked at Washer Brothers in Fort Worth in the fall of 1954, while Harvey attended Strickland and created the 9th grade records that Mr. Cudlitz gave to the FBI. But don't bother to look for Oswald Strickland records in the Warren volumes, and don't waste your time filing a Freedom of Information Act with the FBI, request with the FBI. They deny all knowledge of Strickland. Oswald Strickland records have disappeared, but the memories of Oswald's classmates have not. Doug Gann remembered Oswald in his homeroom. Roy Harvey used to play touch football in Oswald's front yard and saw him in the halls at Strickland. In 1955, Jackie and Bobby Pitts lived at 2224 Thomas Place, next door to Oswald. Interestingly, Paul Gregory, Oswald's friend and Marines interpreter in 1963, also attended Strickland and was in the same grade as Oswald. When we understand there are 2 teenagers using the name Oswald, we realize that each of these boys had to have a parent or guardian. Perhaps this is the reason we see Oswald's mother identified sometimes as Marguerite and other times as Margaret. Now please refer to page 2 of your handout. Oswald's 1955 to 56 employment. Harvey Oswald left Fort Worth and returned to New Orleans in late 1954. His first job at age 15 was at the Dolly Shoe Company. The Warren Commission tells us he worked part-time while attending Beauregard. But Louis Marzari, the store manager, remembered Oswald working during the day, full-time employment. This is Harvey. Louis observed Oswald and was unsatisfied with his work. 3 days after Easter in 1955, Louis fired Oswald after he returned from lunch. While Harvey worked full-time at Dolly Shoe, Lee attended Beauregard with Ed Vogel. According to the Warren Commission, Oswald's next employment was Two Jacks, a freight forwarding company. However, the dates of the employment, as told by the Warren Commission, are a complete fabrication. They tell us he worked at Two Jacks for 2 months. But former Two-Jack employees say he worked there much longer, nearly a year. Robert Oswald was discharged from the Marines in July 1955 and visited Marguerite and Lee for a week in New Orleans before returning to Fort Worth. When Lee joined the Civil Air Patrol on July 27th, Robert helped buy him a uniform from the Army-Navy surplus store. Robert told the Warren Commission during his 1-week stay, Lee was working for an export firm in New Orleans. Lee said, "We're sending an order to Portugal. I received an order from Hong Kong just this morning." The export firm was Jared Two-Jack, and the time was July 1955. Now, Frank De Benedetto, Oswald's supervisor, remembered him as a model employee who was very dependable and about 5'11", a little taller than himself. This was Lee Oswald, quite a bit taller than Harvey. Frank De Benedetto told the House Select Committee Oswald had worked for Two Jacks a year to a year and a half. Gloria Callahan, a secretary at Two Jacks, remembered Oswald working at Two Jacks through April of 1956, when she took a leave of absence to have her first child. Frank did not remember the month Oswald quit, but did remember he quit to join the Marines. Lee Oswald left New Orleans July 1956, moved to Fort Worth, and joined the Marines in October. From Robert Oswald, Gloria Callahan, and Frank De Benedetto, we learned Lee Oswald worked at Two Jacks from July 55 until at least April, and probably July 56. The day after the assassination, former Two-Jack employee Jimmy Hudnall gathered up Oswald's payroll records, time cards, and canceled checks, and gave them to Mr. Two-Jack. Those records have disappeared. Two-Jack did not provide verifiable records such as canceled checks, payroll tax, or Social Security records. Only this handwritten payroll record. Two-Jack was vice president of the Friends of Democratic Cuba. Guy Bannister, Jack Martin, Artasha Smith, Bill Craig, Bill Dalzell, Grady Durham, FBI agent Regis Kennedy, and FBI agent Lansing Logan were either members or associates. If anybody wanted to manufacture dates of employment for Oswald, the Jared Two-Jack Company could provide a good cover. When Lee Oswald worked at Two Jacks in the fall of 1955, Harvey attended Warren Easton High School. On October 17, 1955, Harvey forged a note to the school saying, "We are moving to San Diego in the middle of the month. Will you please send by him any papers such as his birth certificate?" After Harvey quit school, he worked briefly for J.R. Michaels, then left New Orleans for California. We know about his residing in California thanks to Texas Employment Commission employee Laura Kittrell. She interviewed the two Oswalds in 1963 in Dallas. She remembered they looked remarkably similar. One Oswald told her he'd been a motorcycle delivery person for a realty company in California in 1956. before joining the Marines. More of Laura Kittrell's interview will follow. The last company Oswald allegedly worked for prior to joining the Marines was the Pfister Dental Lab. The Warren Commission report states, after quitting J.R. Michaels, he worked several months thereafter for the Pfister Dental Laboratory in 1956. Now, the day after the assassination, Airman Second Class Palmer McBride told the FBI he worked with Oswald from the fall of 1957 to the summer of 1958 at the Pfister Dental Laboratory in New Orleans. They worked together every day and discussed recent Russian space successes. They listened to classical music at each other's homes and debated the merits of communism. In early 1958, McBride took Oswald to a meeting of the New Orleans Amateur Astronomy Association at the home of William Wolfe. Oswald became involved in a discussion about communism, which was overheard by Wolfe's father. Harvey Oswald, who again was promoting communism, was asked to leave. McBride took Oswald to an astronomy meeting at Walter Gerke's home in 1958. Gerke told the FBI none of these meetings were held at his house until 1958. Therefore, McBride and Oswald could only have attended a meeting at Gerke's home in January of 58 or later. McBride worked with Oswald from the fall of 57 through July of 58, when McBride quit to join the Air Force Reserves. Oswald left Pfister's a few weeks before that. Linda Faircloth, current president of the Pfister Dental Laboratory, tells us of Oswald's employment.
General Manager of Pfister Dental. I'm Linda Faircloth, and I'm the General Manager of Pfister Dental Lab, and I've worked for the company since 1977. And I was asked to make a presentation at the President's meeting about 4 years ago on the laboratory and the original owners, and to explain any infamous characters or powerful characters that had ever been affiliated with the company. And through my search and talking to all of the previous owners, to people that had worked for the company, managers, anybody that I could get a lead from, I found out that Pfister was founded in 1906 by Lee Pfister. Oliver Dental Lab was founded in 1916 by John Oliver. And through this, I called Mr. John Oliver to ask him a few questions. And in the conversation, he had told me that one of the stories that I had heard from another person, that Lee and Harvey Oswald had worked for the company, and I started asking him questions about it because I immediately labeled him as the person that was going to be my colorful character. While I was down for the company, we felt that we had to get more active days, and these people that I talked to, Mr. Johnny Lopez, Mr. George Bischoff, Arthur Stump, and John Oliver, that I felt that the time of hire was somewhere in 1957 and 1958, and that he had worked for the company somewhere maybe 6 months or so. They're really not clear or sure about the length of time, but everyone was pretty positive that he worked for them in 1957. And every time I asked a question, everybody would go back and say, well, the one we really need to talk to is Lionel Slater, because he worked with him. I talked to Lionel Slater. Lionel Slater said, the one we really need to talk to is Palmer McBride. And I also talked with Palmer McBride. Assassination had occurred, that immediately the FBI came in and talked to each one of the owners as well as the department heads. They took all the employment records and advised them not to be discussing the case to anyone. And it was extremely important that they kind of keep this under wraps. And at that point, they took all the records that the company had in terms of employment records.
The day after the assassination, the FBI had taken all employment records, payroll records, quarterly tax forms, canceled checks, employment applications, W-2 forms, all documentary evidence pertaining to Oswald. Oswald's employment records at Pfister's, like the Tujak employment records, had disappeared. The owners were told by the FBI not to discuss the case among themselves or with anyone. The FBI discontinued its investigation of Oswald in New Orleans in 1957 and 58 by stating, the information provided by McBride is unfounded and no further investigation is needed. In reality, McBride knew too much about Oswald to be interviewed. But Palmer McBride is available, and he's here tonight in the audience. Where are you, Palmer? Stand up, please. Thanks for coming. McBride and other people who were close to Oswald were never interviewed by the Warren Commission nor the House Select Committee. Not a single Pfister employee or partner testified before the Warren Commission. Thanks to the FBI, not a single Pfister document related to Oswald's employment has been found. Why? Because in 1957 and 58, Lee Oswald was in the Marines in Japan. John Hart Ely, a staff member for the Warren Commission, was responsible for gathering background information on Marguerite and Lee Oswald. He forwarded Palmer McBride and William Wolf's FBI interviews to Albert Jenner and Wesley Liebler on March 30th, 1964. From the FBI interview of McBride, Liebler knew Oswald worked at Pfister's in 57 and 58. From Oswald's Marine records, he knew Oswald was supposed to have been in Japan at the same time. Oswald in both New Orleans and Japan for the same time posed a serious problem. It was unexplainable, and it had to be resolved. On April 10, 1964, Commission Attorney Albert Jenner wrote a memorandum to Mr. Rankin, General Counsel for the Warren Commission. Next slide, please. Thank you. Sorry, Robert. Sorry. Slide on the left. He said, our depositions and examination of records and other data. Back up, please. The one on the left. Thank you. He said, our depositions and examination of records and other data disclose that there are details in Mr. Ely's memoranda which will require material alteration and in some cases omission. McBride's FBI statement was ignored, and neither he nor the owners or employees of Pfister's were interviewed with the Warren Commission. To support their 1956 time frame, the Warren Commission interviewed William Wolf Jr., McBride's friend and fellow Astronomy Club member. In Wolf's testimony, all references to the year 1957 and 58 were avoided. In his opening statement, back over, thanks. In his opening statement, Liebler said, we want to inquire of you concerning possible knowledge that you have of Lee Harvey Oswald during the time he lived in New Orleans during the period 1954 and 55. A clever and misleading statement by an attorney who knew exactly what he was doing. Liebler fixed Wolf's attention to 1954 and 55. By misdirecting Wolf's attention to 54 and 55, references to 57 and 58 were avoided. Liebler obtained testimony that allowed the Warren Commission to circumvent the problem of Oswald's working at Pfister's in 57 and 58. In 1996, I spent the afternoon with William Wolf. He reconstructed his school years from 1952 through 1959. During the 56-57 school year, he was sick and did not attend school the entire year. In the fall of 1957, he returned to De La Salle High School, where the meetings of the New Orleans Amateur Astronomy Association were held. He said he was certain he met Oswald that winter, in either January or February 1958. Exactly what McBride told the FBI in 1963. When the FBI visited the Hotel Senator after the assassination, they interviewed only those employees who worked at the hotel prior to 1956. They avoided employees who worked at the hotel in 57 and 58 who could have remembered Oswald and his mother. They reviewed hotel registration cards for the year 1956 and avoided 1957 and 58. The search for Oswald at the Hotel Senator was deliberately shifted from 1958 to, quote, prior to 1956. McBride met Marguerite Oswald in 1958, yet Marguerite left New Orleans 2 years earlier, then lived and worked around Fort Worth until her death. She never again resided nor worked in New Orleans. But McBride insists he was introduced to Marguerite at the Hotel Senator in 1958. McBride is not alone in his observation of Marguerite in New Orleans. There were several other witnesses and photographs. The photo on the left is Marguerite Oswald in New Orleans in 1957. The photo on the right is Marguerite Oswald in Fort Worth in 1957. The second way in which the FBI dealt with Oswald's presence in New Orleans in 1957 and 58 concerned their handling of the physical evidence. Shortly after Oswald's arrest on November 22nd, Dallas police searched Ruth Payne's house and 1026 Beckett. They confiscated hundreds of items belonging to Oswald. That evening, Dallas Police Chief Curry said, "We got several calls insisting we send his possessions, his possessions, and nobody would tell me exactly who it was that was insisting. They insinuated it was someone in high authority that was requesting this. They wanted this evidence in Washington. About midnight Friday night, November 22nd, we agreed to let the FBI have all the evidence, and they said they would have an agent stand by, and when they were finished with it, return it to us. The person in high authority who requested the evidence be turned over immediately to the FBI was President Johnson's aide, Cliff Carter. The bulk of Oswald's possessions were sent directly to the FBI in Washington without being inventoried or photographed. This provided an opportunity to tamper with evidence, which is exactly what they did. James Cadigan, an FBI document specialist in Washington, received Oswald's possessions. He said, initially, the first big batch of evidence was brought into the laboratory on November 23rd, 1963, and this consisted of many, many items. Cadigan went on to say, time was of the essence, and this material, I believe, was returned to the Dallas police within 2 or 3 days. This portion of Cadigan's testimony was deleted. Look at pages 3 and 4 of your handouts. Oswald's possessions were secretly turned over to the Dallas police and then officially inventoried and photographed on November 26th. The changing of testimony was noticed by some of the Warren Commission staff attorneys. Leon Hubert wrote this memo to Warren Commission Attorney Howard Willits and Warren Commission Attorney General Counsel Rankin. He states, we are requiring witnesses to waive signatures on depositions or sign them. A waiver of signatures certainly does not include permission to change meaning. At the staff meeting on Friday, I raised objections to editing of transcripts and depositions. The only way to avoid all this is to let the depositions rest as they are. Now, they ignored Hubert, and they edited the testimony of Cadigan and other witnesses. Among Oswald's possessions was a 1955 W-2 form from the Dollar Shoe Company. In April 1955, Harvey Oswald was fired by Louis Marzali after lunch. Full-time employment at Dollar Shoe would be reflected in the wages listed on his W-2 form. Full-time employment would also conflict with Oswald attending school at Beauregard. So Harvey Oswald's original W-2 form was replaced with this W-2 form, which shows wages commensurate with part-time employment. Who created this form and when? The Internal Revenue Service wrote this letter to former Dollar Shoe owner Maury Goodman. They informed him that the federal tax ID number for the Dollar Shoe appearing on this 1955 W-2 form was not issued until January 1964. Dollar Shoe was founded in January 1955 and discontinued business in October 1957. That federal tax ID number on this 1955 W-2 form was issued 7 years after the company went out of business. So who had custody of the W-2 form in January 1964? The FBI did. The most significant item found among Oswald's possessions at Ruth Payne's was the W-2 form from the Pfister Dental Lab. That original W-2 form would have given the correct years Oswald worked at Pfister's, 57 and 58. But that item disappeared. It was replaced with this 1956 W-2 form. This form purports to show that Oswald worked at Pfister's in 56 instead of 57 and 58 as reported by McBride and the owners of Pfister's. However, this letter from the Internal Revenue Service informs us that the federal tax ID number appearing on this 1956 W-2 form was also issued in January of 1964. This 1956 W-2 form is also a fake, created in January 64 while in custody of the FBI. Its purpose was to show that Oswald was employed at Pfister's in 56 before he entered the Marines and not in 57 and 58. The tax ID number on the 2-Jack W-2 forms was also issued to the IRS in January 1964. These W-2 forms were created to show Oswald worked at 2-Jacks for 2 months, November and December of 55, instead of the year, as remembered by Frank DiBenedetto, from July of 55 through July of 56. You see, Oswald's working at Two Jacks for an entire year would have conflicted with his Warren Easton High School attendance in the fall of 1955 and his employment at J.R. Michaels in January of 56. When Oswald's possessions were picked up by the Dallas police on November 22nd, Gus Rose and Stovall spent hours initialing each and every item belonging to Oswald. Their initials should be on these W-2 forms. When the Dallas police turned over Oswald's possessions to the FBI, each item was checked off and inventoried by FBI agent Warren DeGroy. But the dollar shoe, Two Jack, and Pfister forms in the National Archives do not have the initials of either Rose or Stovall. They're forgeries created in January 64 to replace the original W-2 forms. These forged documents and 200 other items were then rephotographed by the FBI and returned to Dallas in February 1964. These forgeries are now in the National Archives. They're items number 168, 169, and 175 of Warren Commission Exhibit 2003. While Harvey Oswald attended Warren Easton High School in New Orleans in September and October, Lee Oswald was working at Two Jacks. This created another conflict. School records could not be changed, but changing Oswald's dates of employment at Two Jacks was easy. Instead of Lee Oswald working at Two Jacks from August of 55 through July of 56, his employment records were changed to show he worked at Two Jacks for 2 months, from November 55 till January 56. These 2 months fit neatly between Harvey Oswald's Warren Easton attendance and Harvey Oswald's 2-week employment at J.R. Michaels in January 56. Then, without identifying Oswald's dates of employment, the Warren Commission tells us he was employed for a few months thereafter at the Pfister Dental Laboratory in the spring of 1956. We can now see how the Warren Commission took parts of Harvey Oswald and Lee Oswald's lives and began creating their fictionalized history of Lee Harvey Oswald. You can refer to page 5 of your handouts. Anybody like to stand up and take a break? Keep going. Keep going. Keep going. In the fall of 1956, Harvey Oswald was in Fort Worth, Texas, where he briefly attended Arlington Heights High School. Okay. It was there that former elementary school friend Richard Garrett ran into Oswald. Garrett said he walked up to me in the hall of school. I remember I had to look down on him, and it seemed strange, because he had been the tallest, the dominant member of our group in grammar school. He looked like he was just lost. He was very different from the way I remember him. Of course he was different. Harvey had temporarily replaced Lee. Harvey joined the Marines in October, 3 weeks after this photo was taken on the right. 2 weeks later, someone wrote to the Red Cross asking for help in obtaining emergency leave for Lee Oswald, 2 weeks after he joined. The first inquiry was received by the Red Cross on November 9th. From the Red Cross records, we can see that Marguerite's address is 3830 West 6th, yet according to her landlady, she lived at 4936 Collinwood until July of 1957. Lee Oswald's birth date was given as October 19th instead of October 18th. His military branch was first listed as Army, then scratched out and changed to Marines. Finally, we see that the original inquiry came from Oswald's father and not his mother. All references to him have been scratched out and changed to her. Why would someone inquire about emergency leave for a son only 2 weeks after he joined the Marines? Or did this inquiry come from the father of one of the Oswalds, and later, when someone realized Oswald's father died before he was born, the references on the Red Cross form were changed from his to her? The 112th Military Intelligence Group at Fort Sam Houston maintained a file on Harvey Lee Oswald that was routinely destroyed in 1973. After boot camp and ITR training, Harvey Oswald left for Jacksonville, Florida. Lee Oswald also joined the Marines in October 1956. This photo of Lee, found in the Naval Intelligence file at the National Archive. One more, please, on the left. Yes. This photo of Lee, found in the Naval Intelligence file in the National Archives by my friend and fellow researcher Malcolm Blood, was taken in December 1956. After boot camp and ITR training, Lee Oswald left for Jacksonville, Florida. Alan Feld said he and Oswald attended A&P school in Jacksonville and then Aviation Electronics School in Memphis, Tennessee. Feld described Oswald as a left-wing person who wrote to Senator Strom Thurmond and condemned Eisenhower. The same statements McBride remembered. Feld is describing Harvey Oswald. While Lee attended radar school in Biloxi in June 1957, Alan Feld and Harvey attended Aviation Electronics School in Memphis. When Lee transferred to El Toro in July and left for Japan in August, Alan Feld and Harvey were still in Memphis. Feld last saw Harvey Oswald in September 1957, when Lee was already in Japan. Even though Feld was with Oswald for a year, he was not interviewed by the Warren Commission or the House Select Committee. Feld, like McBride, knew too much about Harvey Oswald to be interviewed. In January 1957, military records show Lee Harvey Oswald was treated for tonsillitis. He was again treated for tonsillitis in 1958 and given injections of penicillin. But according to the FBI report, Dr. Philbin of Dallas, Texas, had removed Oswald's tonsils 12 years earlier, in January 1945. From Memphis, Harvey Oswald may have traveled to Columbus, Ohio. Sergeant Donald Schwartz of the Columbus, Ohio Police Department Intelligence Division. Deborah, slide please. Found a report stating Lee Harvey Oswald attended Antioch College in Yellow Springs, Ohio for a short period of time in 1957. Additional allegations of Oswald's presence in Yellow Springs, Ohio came from an unidentified counterintelligence agent from the Office of Special Investigations at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. The agent said Oswald received money on a regular basis through money orders issued by the Miami Deposit Bank of Yellow Springs, Ohio. In the fall of 1957, Harvey Oswald was in New Orleans, where he worked at the District Dental Labs with Palmer McBride until July of '58, while Lee Oswald was in Japan. This photo of Harvey was probably taken in early 1957. Lee Oswald, while in Japan, never spoke Russian, never read Russian newspapers, nor discussed communism. He hated the name Harvey, or Har, and was given the nickname Ozzy. Peter Cassisi, John Heindel, and other Marines who served with Oswald at Atsugi remembered Lee Oswald returning to the base drunk on numerous occasions. But the person killed with Jack Ruby did not drink and did not smoke. In October 1957, Lee Oswald shot himself in the arm with a .22 Derringer while in the Marines at Atsugi. Lee Oswald was taken to the hospital where the wound was sewed up. Later, an incision was made in his arm 2 inches from the entrance wound to remove the bullet. No scars from either arm wound are visible from photographs taken during Oswald's autopsy. Mortician Paul Grudy was asked twice about the scars on Oswald's arms. Both times, Grudy said he'd not seen any scars on Oswald's arms near the elbow. The FBI interviewed 36 Marines who were acquainted with Oswald, with the Oswalds. 26 men who knew Harvey Oswald at El Toro in 1959, 2 who knew Lee from radar school, and 8 who were stationed with Lee Oswald in Japan. The FBI ignored Marines who knew Lee Oswald in Japan, choosing instead to interview Marines who barely knew him. William Trail saw little of Oswald. Paul Murphy did not know Oswald personally. Owen Djanovich never had any discussions of any kind with Oswald. Cassisi did not recognize Oswald as his former Marine associate when Oswald's pictures were published after the assassination. Lee Oswald was close to 3 Marines: George Wilkins, Zach Stout, and Bobby Warren. They often went on liberty with Oswald on weekends. They visited the Queen Bee Bar, were together on Corregidor, Civic Bay. Stout said Oswald, Ozzy, as he called him, was always writing letters to his mother, yet no letters from Japan can be found. It is doubtful the handwriting of Lee's letters from Japan would match the handwriting of Harvey's letters from Russia. After Oswald snapped the photograph of George Wilkins, one more please. One more please. One more. We got lost somewhere.
It's back about 4 slides.
All right. We're back.
It's one word there too.
Yes, 2 together. 2 good. It doesn't work. Oh. That's okay. Just leave it. No, don't worry. Go. It's okay. Go forward. These Marines, who were with Lee Oswald nearly every day in Japan, were not interviewed by the Warren Commission. Zach Stout's interview in 1978 with the House Select Committee was withheld from the public until 1996. Marines who were close to Oswald, Lee Oswald, were neither interviewed nor were their interviews made public. This 1958 photo, taken by Robert Oswald, go forward please. That one right there. This 1958 photo, taken by Robert Oswald, is the Lee Oswald known by Zach Stout, George Wilkinson, Bobby Warren, not Harvey Oswald, who defected to Russia. Harvey Oswald, who left the Pfister Dental Laboratory in 1958, took Lee's place at the Marine base in El Toro in December. Harvey used the next 9 months to convince fellow Marines of his interest in communism and his ability to speak Russian. Some researchers have speculated that Oswald learned Russian at the Monterey School of Languages in California. When? During boot camp, ITR training in California, in Jacksonville, Florida, Biloxi, Mississippi, in Japan with his mobile radar unit that traveled from the Philippines to Taiwan? No. The Lee Oswald who left Japan in November did not speak a word of Russian, nor was he trained in Russian, nor did he attend the Monterey School of Languages. Harvey replaced Lee at El Toro and took the Russian language exam in February 1959. Lee Oswald's brother, John Pick, wasn't fooled with a switch. Pick told the Warren Commission, "I would never guess that that would be Lee." Pick knew this person was not his brother. So did Robert Oswald. On March 23rd, Harvey Oswald obtained a GED, equivalent to a high school degree. When Attorney Rankin questioned Marguerite Oswald about the high school degree, she said, "I have that. His original correspondence in the service." Forward, please, on the left. There we go. His original correspondence in the service, completed school, January 1958, passing a 65 on a scale of 100. 2 high school GED degrees, one obtained by Lee in January 1958, one obtained by Harvey in March 1959, both obtained while in the Marines. In June, Harvey Oswald had a date with Rosalind Quinn. They spoke Russian together for several hours. Oswald's interest in reading Russian newspapers, listening to Russian records, and speaking Russian was noticed by his fellow Marines who called him Oswaldovich. Terry Thornley from New Orleans noticed that Oswald spoke with no Southern dialect. If anything, he had a New York accent. Thornley knew Harvey, the Oswald who lived in New York. On August 7, 1959, Harvey Oswald was granted a dependency discharge from the Marines. His early discharge was predicated upon an alleged work injury suffered by Marguerite Oswald. Dr. Milton Goldberg, who had first treated her in January 1959, Marguerite told him her son wanted to defect to Russia. This was 10 months before Harvey went to Russia. Harvey Oswald remained at El Toro until his discharge September 11th. Lee was living in New Orleans. Captain Valentine Ashworth met Oswald in New Orleans, quote, before he went to Russia. On June 28, 1959, Oswald was registered in room D at the Macbeth rooming house in New Orleans. A month later, Mrs. Gladys Davis was introduced to Lee Oswald at her home in Coral Gables, Florida. In September 1959, she was living with Martinez Malo, who had numerous Cuban associates who came to their residence. A Cuban exile named Francisco Rodriguez Tamayo, also known as Mexicano, had introduced Oswald to her. This is the same time frame during which Maria Lorenz claimed she first met Oswald in a CIA safe house in Miami. Lee Oswald would continue his association with Cuban exiles and their CIA handlers for the next 3 years, when Harvey was in Russia. Lee Oswald used this photo on this passport application. That's the photo, one more, on that application. He used this Department of Defense ID card for identification, a card often issued to intelligence operatives. But the photo on the ID card was only half his. Last slide, please. The other half of the photo was Harvey. This ID card could be used by either Harvey or Lee. Lee Oswald then traveled to Fort Worth. visited his mother, and remained there through September 16th. On September 16th, Harvey Oswald was in New Orleans and filled out a passenger immigration form. He did not have a Los Angeles passport with him and incorrectly listed the issuing passport office as New Orleans. Lee, who had the Los Angeles issued passport, was still in Fort Worth. A side-by-side comparison of the immigration form and Oswald's passport application reveals not only inconsistencies, it also provides a rare chance to compare the handwriting of Lee Oswald and Harvey Oswald. Harvey Oswald purchased a ticket in the International Trademark Building, boarded the SS Marion Lights, and left for Russia. This article and photo appeared in the Fort Worth Star-Telegram concerning Oswald's defection. This is Lee Oswald, recognizable to residents of Fort Worth. Harvey Oswald's photograph did not appear in the Fort Worth newspapers in 1959. Slide, right? No one in Fort Worth would have recognized this person as Lee Oswald. Lee Oswald remained in the United States while Harvey went to Russia. When Harvey Oswald first met Marina, we have Lee on the left, we have Harvey on the right. When Harvey Oswald met Marina, she thought he was a native Russian with a Baltic accent. When she learned he was a foreigner, she asked which of his parents were Russian. His March 1961 medical records from Minsk list his name as Harvey Oswald. A State Department security memo of March 2nd, 1961 refers to Harvey Oswald. A letter written to Oswald in May 3rd, 1961 is addressed to esteemed citizen Harvey Oswald. A CIA memo of November 25th, 1963 explained the agency's interest in the Harvey story. The merging of Harvey Oswald with Lee Oswald's background had been successful. Russian-speaking Harvey was in Russia, and Lee was working with CIA operatives in New Orleans, Texas, and Florida. People who look similar, like Harvey and Lee, are often used by the intelligence community. Castro's top agents were identical twin brothers, Patricio and Antonio de la Guardia. Lee and Harvey were not identical in appearance, but they looked similar enough to confuse, deceive, and fool those who knew or saw them. This is the smoke and mirrors Jim Garrison spoke of, trademarks of the intelligence community. Lee Oswald was in New Orleans and Florida in the summer and fall of 1959. William Huffman told the FBI he saw Oswald sometime after Castro came to power in January '59. Oswald and 4 or 5 Cubans refueled a 43-foot Chris Craft diesel at his dock. Oswald then phoned Reuben in Key West, who came to the dock to pay for fuel. Reuben, of course, may have been Jack Ruby, who ran guns to Castro in the late '50s from a house in Kima, Texas. Neighbors were quite familiar with Ruby and remembered his weekend trips to Cuba in a 50-foot surplus military craft loaded with guns. Marina Lorenz met Lee Oswald at a safe house in Miami in 1960. Saw him again at CIA training camps in Florida Everglades several times in '60 and '61. Former Congressman Claire Booth Luce financed Cuban exile groups in the early 1960s. The captain of one of her ships advised her, quote, Lee Oswald and others were involved in infiltration of communist groups in the area. By June 1960, J. Edgar Hoover was aware of an Oswald in the States and an Oswald in Russia. He sent this memo to his field offices warning them that an imposter may be using Oswald's birth certificate. FBI files contain many reports of Lee Oswald in the States while Harvey was in Russia, many more than I've showed you, but you won't find them in the warning lives. In January '61, Fred Sewell, manager of the Bolton Truck Center in New Orleans, met Lee Oswald, who wanted to buy trucks to be sent to Cuba. The sales order form listed the purchaser as Friends of Democratic Cuba, whose members included former FBI agent Guy Bannister, active FBI agents Logan and Kennedy, and Lee Oswald's former employer, Jared Tujak. In the spring of 1961, Lee Oswald visited the Dumas and Milne Chevrolet dealership in New Orleans. He and salesman James Spencer had coffee at Walgreens and discussed the sale of a 1958 Chevrolet. This Oswald, Lee Oswald, could drive, and as we shall see, had a valid Texas driver's license. In May 1961, Robert Tabor, a member of the Fair Play for Cuba Committee, and Lieutenant Oswald met with Dr. Enrique Luaces in Havana, Cuba. Oswald was introduced as an arms expert. Dr. Luaces had no doubt the Oswald he met in 1961 and Lee Harvey Oswald, whose picture appeared on television after the assassination, are one and the same. After the assassination, The U.S. Army forwarded a file captioned Harvey Oswald to the FBI, which contained an Army intelligence report about Oswald and Robert Tabor in Cuba. In July 1961, Ray Carter, news director for radio station KBOX in Dallas, told the FBI he met with Lee Oswald on several occasions during the summer of '61. Oswald tried to obtain from him the names of pilots who had volunteered to fly Flying Tiger missions over Cuba. The FBI knew how to deal with Carter. They told him Oswald was in Russia during 1961, and he was simply mistaken. In the fall of 1961, police officer Charles Noto arrested Lee Oswald and Celso Hernandez on Breakwater Road on the lakefront in New Orleans. They were brought to Levee Board Police Headquarters, where, after a closed-door session with Marcel Compton, the officer in charge, they were released. This 1961 arrest is very important. 2 years later, in August 1963, Celso Hernandez would again be arrested, but this time he was arrested with Harvey Oswald, who created a disturbance by handing out fair play for Cuba literature. Hernandez knew both Oswalds. In late 1961 or early 1962, Steve Landesberg, Earl Perry, and Oswald created a demonstration in New York City. Landesberg and Perry would create the demonstrations while Oswald took photographs. A few hours after the assassination, Landesberg told his story to the FBI. Again, the FBI knew how to deal with Landesberg. Because the FBI knew Oswald was in Russia during '61 and '62, they charged Landesberg with providing false information to the government and had him committed to the Bellevue Psychiatric Center in New York. The entire court case, U.S. versus Stephen Harris Landesberg, including 2 backup microfilm copies, disappeared from the court archival records. When the FBI tried to obtain Earl Perry's records from the Marines, they were told they would have to get clearance from the Pentagon. Leander Diaby worked as a doorman at the Court of Two Sisters restaurant in the French Quarter in the summer of 1962. A man he later identified as Lee Harvey Oswald approached him and asked for Clay Bertrand. The restaurant manager, Gene Davis, told Diaby he would speak with the man instead. Davis spoke with Oswald at the bar, and later, after Oswald left, he told Diaby that the man had recently been behind the Iron Curtain. On a Saturday morning in November 1963, about 2 weeks before the assassination, Diaby went looking for Davis to obtain his paycheck. He found Davis in an upstairs storeroom that was being used as a makeshift apartment. With Davis were Lee Oswald, David Ferry, a Cuban, and 3 unidentified men. In 1968, Gene Davis was interviewed by Garrison and asked to take a polygraph. He refused. He had good reason to refuse. Eugene Claire Davis was an active informant of the New Orleans FBI, designated symbol informant 1189C as of October 11, 1961. The National Archives has many documents on Gene Davis, most of them postponed in full. From 1959 through the spring of '62, Lee Oswald, Lee, was surrounded by people involved in Cuban affairs. People we now know who were either working for or closely associated with the CIA and FBI. Harvey left Russia, moved to Fort Worth, where he impressed the Dallas Russian community with his command of the Russian language. George de Warenshield said Harvey preferred speaking Russian to English. They discussed classical Russian literature in the Russian language. Now, speaking elementary Russian is one thing. Speaking and reading Russian well enough to discuss classical Russian literature with a well-educated native-speaking Russian is another matter. The Warren Commission wants us to believe that this high school dropout taught himself Russian by reading Russian newspapers at age 19. In reality, Harvey had been speaking Russian for a long time, since childhood. Oswald's Russian-speaking ability allowed him to observe and report on conditions in the Soviet Union. His 50-page manuscript, found in volume 16, is replete with minute detail, facts, and data, not the type of information recorded by a tourist or temporary resident of Russia. When Lee Oswald's older brother, John Pick, saw Harvey Oswald after he returned from Russia, Pick told the Warren Commission, "The Lee Harvey Oswald I met in November 1962 was not the same Lee Oswald I had known 10 years previous." When Attorney Jenner asked Pick how he looked physically as compared with when he last seen him, Pick said, "I never would have recognized him, sir." "You noticed a material change in his appearance?" Pick replied, "Much thinner, didn't have as much hair, different facial features, eyes set back. His face was rounder. He no longer had a bull neck." The Oswald that Pick saw on Thanksgiving Day in 1962 wrote his name in Pick's address book as Harvey. In September 62, when Harvey and Oswald were working at Leslie Welding in Fort Worth, ex-CIA agent Donald Norton met with Lee Oswald in Mexico. He gave Oswald $50,000 in cash in return received a manila envelope. In March 63, when Harvey and Marina were living on Neely Street, a letter was found in the mailbox at the Carousel Club, addressed to Jake Rubenstein. The return address was Lee Oswald, 1106 Deisman Avenue, Dallas, Texas. Daniel Thomas McGowan, a prominent Memphis attorney, found the letter below the mailbox and notified the FBI. In June 1963, Harvey Oswald applied for a passport. He listed his mother's and father's birth date incorrectly and misspelled his mother's maiden name. 4 years earlier, in September 1959, Lee Oswald applied for a passport and made similar mistakes. It is likely the 1959 passport application was filled out by Lee and the 1963 passport application was filled out by Harvey. The discrepancies in his parents' birth dates on two passport applications are unexplainable. Curiously, another individual applied for and received passports on two separate occasions and made the same mistakes as both Oswalds. Both parents had different birth dates listed on each passport application. That person was Oswald's cousin, Marilyn Moret. In July, while Harvey's working at Riley Coffee in New Orleans, Marshall Hicks, an employee of Western Union, delivered several telegrams to Oswald at 1501 West 7th in Fort Worth. In the spring and summer of 1963, Dorothy Markham dated Jack Ruby. She was certain that Oswald and Ruby not only knew each other, but that Oswald had worked for Ruby in June and July 1963. When Ruby's automobile needed work, mechanic Robert Roy said it was Lee Oswald who delivered and picked up the car, not once, but several times. When Frances Hiss visited Jack Ruby at the Carousel Club, she saw a man enter through the back door. Ruby said, "Hi, Ozzie," and told him to go in the back room. When Ruby finished speaking with Miss Hiss, he joined Ozzie. She said there was no doubt in her mind it was Oswald. Dozens of people saw Oswald and Ruby together in the summer and fall of 1963. Ruby was with Lee Oswald. Harvey was in New Orleans. This is precisely the time when Harvey was residing with Marina in New Orleans. Here's a list of people who place Oswald and Ruby together. Through early 1963, the activities of Harvey and Lee had no apparent relationship to the assassination. But in the summer of 1963, things changed. Antonio Veciana observed his longtime associate, Bishop, with Lee Oswald at the Southland building in Dallas. Bishop, also known as David Atlee Phillips, was head of Cuban propaganda for the CIA. Why would the head of CIA Cuba propaganda operations be with Lee Oswald? Because the plot, as we know it, could not have succeeded without Lee Oswald. During the next 2 months, Lee Oswald was used to impersonate Harvey in a series of events that were designed to set up Harvey as the assassin and implicate Cuba as his sponsor. It is not unreasonable to speculate that David Phillips masterminded this plan. After the assassination, Phillips was in a perfect position to receive, direct, and control inquiries to the CIA in Mexico City regarding Oswald. In August, Harvey was arrested in New Orleans for creating a disturbance while passing out fair play for Cuba literature. Helping him was Charles Hall Steele, who we now know was an FBI informant identified as Dallas T-14. A photograph of Oswald was shown to Oswald's brother, John Pick. Attorney Jenner asked, "Do you recognize the young man handing out leaflets?" Pick replied, "No, sir, I would be unable to recognize him." Jenner replied, "As to whether he's your brother?" Pick replied, "That's correct." Once again, John Pick refused to identify Harvey Oswald as his brother. Instead of asking Pick to identify the person in the photos, they asked no further questions. Again and again, Pick told the Warren Commission the photos in Life magazine were not his brother, but nobody listened. How many times does John Pick have to tell us these photos are not his brother before we believe him? In September 63, while Harvey's in New Orleans, Lee Oswald and Mr. Hernandez approached Robert McEwen at his home in Bay Cliff, Texas. Hernandez, in his 40s, may have been the 47-year-old Celso Hernandez, arrested with Oswald in 1961 and again in 63. Lee Oswald offered to purchase Savage 300 automatic rifles with scopes, rifles that could be purchased much cheaper from Sears and Roebuck. McEwen wondered why someone would pay so much for these rifles. McEwen told the House Select Committee, "We have a voice tape of McEwen. It's several hours long. We've got just a couple of excerpts."
He said, "No, we want to get it through you." He said, "So we know you can get it false." Now, I said, "Well, he's coming wrong, and I'm not going to give you bottles." And thank God I didn't get it. Since all this came up, I'm sure glad I didn't get it.
That's the end of the one. We have two short excerpts.
So he said, "I'll give you $10,000. For rifles." So I thought about it, and I said, no. I said, no. I said, just like I told you, I'm not really involved in no kind of harm. I said, hell, if you want for a rifle, but I'm not to see a rope, I'm about it. I said, you can get rifles with any hardware store.
McEwen said, "That's what puzzled me. Why would he come to me?" McEwen may have been puzzled, but it made perfect sense to the people who sent Lee Oswald to McEwen to purchase the rifles. This photograph appeared in the Houston Chronicle on April 29, 1959. It was McEwen and his friend Fidel Castro. McEwen had provided Castro with armaments during the Cuban Revolution. Grateful for McEwen's help, Castro offered McEwen concessions for a high position in the Cuban government during his visit to Houston. If anyone had wanted to place the blame for Kennedy's assassination on the Cuban government, what better way than to have Castro's close friend and gun supplier, Robert McEwen, provide Oswald with the rifles to assassinate Kennedy? In September 1963, Miss Lou Hayes noticed a young man sitting close to her on a bus. He began talking about his recent trip to Cuba. He said, "I flew there. I saw Castro." 2 months later, when Mrs. Hayes saw Oswald's photograph on TV, she recognized him as the young man she'd seen on the bus. Mrs. Hayes was a longtime friend of Warren Commission member Hale Boggs. Mr. Boggs sent this letter to Warren Commission Counsel Rankin. He wrote, "Mrs. Hayes is a thoroughly responsible person, and information contained in her letter of December 11, 1963 should be checked out thoroughly by the Commission. The statements made by the person she saw on the bus, probably Lee Oswald, were staged to show a close relationship between Cuba, Castro, and Oswald." In September 1963, former Army Intelligence Officer Richard Case Nagel knew of an impending assassination attempt on President Kennedy. Nagel wrote to J. Edgar Hoover advising him that a conspiracy involving Lee Harvey Oswald would take place in the latter part of September. Wanting no part of the conspiracy, on September 20th, Nagel walked into the State National Bank in El Paso and fired shots into the ceiling. He walked outside, waited for police to arrest him, and was taken to jail. When searched, the police found a photocopy of an ID card belonging to Lee Harvey Oswald. Close examination of the Oswald ID card found on Nagel and the Oswald ID card taken from Oswald on November 22nd showed differences. The postmark on Oswald's card does not appear on Nagel's copy. The signatures do not match, and the photographs are not the same. The photograph on Nagel's copy of Oswald's ID card, though not very clear, has different facial features, a different hairline, and different clothing. 2 different photos of Oswald on 2 otherwise identical ID cards. What Nagel was doing with a copy of Oswald's ID card 2 months before the assassination remains a mystery. On September 23rd, while Harvey, Marina, and June, and Ruth Payne were in New Orleans, Lee Oswald applied for a job through the Texas Employment Commission at the Sentner Drug Store in Dallas, Texas. On September 25th, when Oswald cashed an unemployment check at the Winn-Dixie store in New Orleans, Mrs. Lee Donnelly of the Selective Service Commission in Austin, Texas, interviewed a man who identified himself as Harvey Oswald. He was attempting to straighten out his dishonorable discharge from the Marines. Oswald said he'd entered the Marines in Florida and resided in Fort Worth. He was also seen in an Austin cafe later that day. On September 26th, Lee Oswald sat next to John Howard Bowen, quote, Albert Osborne, on a bus bound for Mexico City. He discussed Mexico with two Australian girls, pointed out landmarks, and recommended the Hotel Cuba. On September 27th, Oswald visited the Cuban embassy. When refused a visa, he caused a minor scene which was remembered by embassy personnel. J. Edgar Hoover alleged that when Oswald was refused a visa, he left, saying, "I'm going to kill Kennedy for this." Hoover's allegation was not supported by the Cubans at the embassy. Cuban consul Eusebio Askew and his assistant Sylvia Duran remembered Oswald. Sylvia Duran said Oswald was her height, about 5'3", and having blonde hair. When Askew saw television coverage of the assassination, Askew said the Oswald he saw did not even resemble the man who visited his consulate. 2 photographs were taken of Oswald inside the embassy by Cubans. The photographs show a medium-height, blonde person wearing a sweater. Oswald visited the Russian embassy at noon on September 27th, where he spoke in broken Russian to employees of the embassy. This Oswald's Russian was so poor, he and the embassy staff switched to English. The Oswald George de Mohrenschildt knew, Harvey, spoke Russian well enough to discuss classical Russian literature in the Russian language, certainly not broken Russian. The day after the assassination, J. Edgar Hoover told Lyndon Johnson, quote, "We have up here the tape recording and the photograph of the man who was at the Soviet embassy using Oswald's name. That picture and tape recording do not correspond to this man's voice nor to his appearance. In other words," Hoover said, "it appears that there is a second person who was at the Soviet embassy down there." End quote. It appears neither Harvey nor Lee were in Mexico City. Had this person been Harvey or Lee, CIA cameras would have recorded his visit and provided a photo, or at least tape recording would have been of Oswald's voice. The CIA would have provided a photo of Harvey or Lee, not this middle-aged, heavy-set, unidentified man. According to Richard Helms, this photograph was taken after Oswald left Mexico on October 4th. There was little, if any, evidence that placed either Harvey or Lee in Mexico City. David Atlee Phillips was a longtime associate of Alpha 66 leader Antonio Veciana. Phillips knew that Veciana had a relative in the Cuban embassy. He was asked by Phillips to offer his relative a large sum of money to say the relative and his wife met Oswald during his Mexico City trip. If evidence would not place Oswald in Mexico City, money might. Attempted bribery and coercion by the head of Cuban operations for the CIA, David Atlee Phillips. Further indications of CIA involvement. Further attempts to place Oswald in Mexico City. Visits to the Cuban and Russian embassies took place on September 27th. That evening, a Leon Oswald, probably Lee, was in Dallas visiting Sylvia Odeon. On the afternoon of the following day, Mrs. Lorena Brayshaw and her daughter Carol met and spent several hours with Harvey Oswald in New Orleans in the French Quarter. The same day, September 28th, with an Oswald in Mexico City, Harvey in New Orleans, Lee Oswald arrived at the Sportsdrome Rifle Range driving a 1940 Model Ford. He asked Mr. Price, a friend of the owner of the facility, to help him sight in a rifle. It was evening. With carbides shining on the target, Mr. Price sighted in his rifle. On October 3rd, an Oswald left Mexico at Nuevo Laredo at 1:30. Mexican records list Oswald's departure by automobile. The Warren Commission says he left by bus and arrived in San Antonio at 6:30. During the next few days, Oswald sightings multiplied. And Oswald spent the night, October 4th, in Alice, Texas, 100 miles east of Laredo. The next morning, accompanied by a woman and 2-year-old child, he drove an old model car to radio station KOPY. He filled out an employment application, visited with Layman Stewart and Robert Janka, and said he'd just come from Mexico. A couple days later, Oswald applied for a job at the Continental Oil Company in Houston. This person identified himself as Lee Oswald and was interviewed by Mrs. Shepard. He told her he just returned from Mexico with a friend. They tried to proceed from Mexico to Cuba. Oswald told her he'd been staying at the Savoy Apartments 2 blocks away. George Ryan, manager of the Stop and Go Drive-In Grocery in Houston, told the FBI that Oswald tried on 3 successive days to cash a $65 check in his store. He told the Houston Press he was under orders from the FBI not to discuss the case. We have one Oswald leaving Mexico on October 3rd, driving through Alice, Texas on October 4th with a woman and a 2-year-old child, applying for a job in Houston, residing at the Savoy Apartments during the week of the 7th, and trying to cash a $65 check. With an Oswald in Alice, Texas, Harvey Oswald was in New Orleans on October 3rd, registered at the Hotel LaSalle. The hotel registration card showed that Oswald registered for a period of 2 or 3 hours and was assigned room 218 and was charged $5. On the afternoon of October 3rd, with an Oswald and Alice text, Harvey in New Orleans, another Oswald, probably Lee, was interviewed by Harry Sanderson of the Texas Employment Commission. Slide left. Later on, Oswald registered at the Dallas YMCA and was assigned room 601. On October 4th, Harvey filled out an application at Jobco in Dallas. That evening, Dallas attorney Carol Jarnigan overheard a conversation between Jack Ruby and Harvey at the Carousel Club. Harvey Oswald told Jack Ruby he just got in from New Orleans. Jarnigan took notes of that conversation, which appear as Warden Commission Exhibit 2821. According to Ruth Payne, Oswald stayed at her house in Irving on the 4th, 5th, and 6th of October. The next day, the 7th, Harvey rented a room from Mary Bledsoe. From September 25th through October 5th, Oswald can be found in New Orleans, Mexico City, Dallas, Houston, and a number of small towns near Alice, Texas, all at the same time. These multiple sightings have confused researchers for years and continue to confuse us today. The available evidence simply does not allow us to accurately pinpoint which Oswald was at a particular location at a particular time. What is obvious from the multiple concurrent Oswald sightings is the unseen hand of covert intelligence. Lee Oswald was at the Sportsdrome Rifle Range on the 10th and again on the 17th, while Harvey was working at the book depository. He arrived with another man in a car and wound up shooting at Mr. Slack's target. Mr. Slack identified Oswald's picture, but said Oswald's hair was much longer. Laurel Kittro of the Texas Employment Commission interviewed Harvey Oswald before he began work at the book depository. He told her he'd just come up from New Orleans. She described him as neat in appearance and articulate. He told her his first job was selling shoes. In 1956, he moved to Encino, California, and worked 6 months as a motor scooter messenger boy before he joined the Marines. Laurel Kittro interviewed Harvey, who first worked at Dolly Shoe and wrote the infamous note to Warren Easton High School in October '55, stating, "We're moving to San Diego." Her curiosity was aroused when Oswald told her he lived in Russia and had a Russian wife. She noticed the woman with him was about to have a baby and remembered her as being quite short and wearing no makeup. During this interview, she asked him what he liked best about Russia. He replied, "The opera." A week later, Oswald showed up for another interview, but Mrs. Kittro realized this Oswald was not the same person she'd interviewed before. She was correct. Harvey was working at the book depository. They were very, very similar, but different people. She said, "The man I remember as Harvey Oswald and the man I remember as the Teamster were very much alike in shape, size, and outline. Generally, there was a marked difference between them in bearing and manner. The man I remember as Oswald was a trim, energetic, compact, well-knit person who sat on the edge of his chair. The man I remember as the Teamster was sprawled over his chair and was rather messy looking." After the assassination, Mrs. Kittro wrote and phoned the FBI, but was not interviewed until a year later, after the Warren volumes were already published. On the evening of October 22nd, an Oswald Lee visited the home of Harold Zotch in Grand Prairie, Texas. Mrs. James Walker and Oswald spoke for nearly 2 hours. Oswald told her he'd been to Russia and was writing a book. He said he'd been working at the Texas bookstore for 8 days, had a room in Oak Cliff, and his wife lived in Irving. She noticed a tattoo of a dagger with a snake on his left forearm. She asked him what this meant, and he said, "Don't tread on me. You know, don't step on me." About 10 p.m., Oswald left in an old model car driven by a tall, dark-headed young man. On October 24th, FBI agent Milton Capp visited the Department of Vital Statistics in New Orleans. He inquired about birth records for Lee Harvey Oswald 3 weeks before the assassination. With FBI informant Gene Davis keeping company with Lee Oswald, FBI informant Charles Steele handing out fair play for Cuba literature with Harvey, and FBI agent Hosty keeping tabs on Harvey in Dallas, the FBI was certainly interested in Oswald. Their interest may have prompted FBI agent Milton Capp to check the birth record of Lee Harvey Oswald 3 weeks before the assassination. 2 weeks later, Jack Ruby and a man believed to be Oswald were at the Contract Electronics store in Dallas at 3 p.m. The store personnel, Robert Patterson, Kermit Patterson, Donald Stewart, and Charles Arndt discussed the buying and selling of electronic equipment. Patterson identified Lee Oswald from New Orleans police photographs as the person in the store. He said Oswald had a tattoo on his left forearm. In Irving, Texas, Harry Spencer interviewed Oswald for a job at his heating and air conditioning company. He found Oswald so interesting he spoke with him for nearly an hour, yet Warren Commission records show Harvey was working at the book depository at the same time. Cliff Chastain operated a barber shop less than a mile from the Payne's house in Irving. Chastain, a 10-year Irving City Council member, was Lee Oswald's barber. He saw Oswald at various Irving locations, including Williamsburg's drugstore, Hutchison's grocery, and the Payne's house. Every other week, Oswald drove the Payne station wagon to his house for a haircut. Chastain thought he lived with the Paynes. So did the neighborhood postman, who remembered the substantial amounts of mail Oswald received at the Paynes. Chastain and fellow barbers cut Lee Oswald's hair twice a month, beginning in the summer of 1963. FBI agent Bardwell Odom told Chastain that his memory of cutting Oswald's hair in the summer of '63 was during the time Oswald lived in New Orleans. Chastain said, "I can't help what it contradicts. That's just the fact, and that's it." He remembered Oswald had nearly black hair, as well as black, hairy arms. He remembered that Oswald always wore long-sleeve or short-sleeve coveralls that buttoned up the front. Yet no coveralls were found among Oswald's possessions, nor was Oswald known to even wear coveralls. Chastain noticed Oswald's yellow shoes, which Oswald said he purchased in Mexico for $1.50. Oswald said he frequently traveled to Mexico. Shortly after the assassination, the FBI was trying to find evidence of Oswald's visit to Mexico. The yellow shoes noticed by Chastain would have helped the FBI place Oswald in Mexico. Yet no yellow shoes were found among Oswald's possessions, and the FBI was unable to come up with any physical evidence that linked Harvey Oswald with his alleged trip to Mexico City. Finally, 9 months after the assassination, on August 27, 1964, the FBI was provided with items that link Oswald to Mexico City. A guide map of Mexico City, a pamphlet for the week of September 24th, and a portion of a bus ticket were conveniently provided by Marina, having been discovered by CIA asset Priscilla Johnson McMillan. On one visit to Chastain's barbershop, Oswald was accompanied by an unknown 14-year-old boy. Later, in October, this boy was dropped off for a haircut by someone driving a 1958 Ford. Chastain often saw Oswald at Hutchison's grocery across the street from his shop. Store owner Leonard Hutchison said Oswald came to his paid FBI informant. When Hosty mentioned that he contacted Oswald by placing notes under Oswald's apartment door, Carver said, "You mean the Payne's house?" Hosty said, "No, Oswald's apartment." On Wednesday or Thursday, November 6th or 7th, Oswald, wife, and child arrived at 2 p.m. in a 1958 blue Ford. Marina was recognized by Gertrude Hunter, a friend of the store owner, Edith Whitworth. Mrs. Hunter had previously seen and spoken to Marina at Vineyard's Grocery and a service station located at 6th and Hastings Street. Mrs. Hunter remembered that Marina spoke with a woman dressed in a white uniform about clothing and the welfare of her baby. She remembered the Salvation Army was mentioned. Mrs. Ambrose Martinez, intake secretary of the Salvation Army in Dallas, told the FBI that Lee and Marina, accompanied by 2 children, came to her office seeking aid. Oswald gave Mrs. Payne as a reference. He said he met Mrs. Payne in New Orleans, and he and Marina lived with Mrs. Payne in Irving. Oswald mentioned to Mrs. Whitworth of the Furniture Mart he had an apartment and would need furniture in a couple of weeks. After the assassination, Marina denied being in the store or meeting with either woman. In an attempt to resolve the matter before the Warren Commission had Mrs. Whitworth and Mrs. Hunter meet with Marina face to face. Both women positively identified her as the woman they'd seen and spoken with at the Furniture Mart, as well as other locations. Marina not only denied being at the Furniture Mart, she denied ever knowing these women, denied applying for assistance from the Salvation Army, denied shopping at Hutchison's Grocery, denied shopping at Vineyard's Grocery, denied riding in a car driven by her husband. If Marina had admitted to riding in a car with Oswald, or if Ruth and Michael Payne admitted loaning Oswald either of their cars, they would have confirmed his driving ability. A check with the Texas Department of Public Safety would have turned up a driver's license in the name of Lee Harvey Oswald and risked exposing the two Oswalds. Many people had knowledge of Lee Oswald's Texas driver's license and driving ability. When Marina, Robert, and the Paynes refused to admit Oswald could drive, they were referring to Harvey. They all knew Lee, and they all knew he could drive. Harvey lived in Oak Cliff, 13 miles from the Payne house, worked at the book depository without missing a day, was not in Irving during the week, did not have a driver's license, and could not drive. Lee Oswald had a Texas driver's license, was seen driving several different cars, and may have had an apartment in or near Irving as mentioned by Hosty. As Shastine observed, Lee may have even lived at the Payne house during the week. In late October and early November, Lee Oswald was used again and again to set up Harvey as the patsy. In late October, Oswald drove to the Sportsdome Rifle Range, where he again target practiced. On October 31st, Oswald applied for the job at the multi-story Statler Hilton Hotel in downtown Dallas. On November 1st, Oswald purchased ammunition at Morgan's gun shop. November 4th, Dollar Ryder's gun shop to have a scope mounted, even though Mr. Davis had sighted an Oswald's rifle with a scope at the Sportsdome Rifle Range a month earlier. The rifle order from Klein's in March 1963 came with a scope already mounted. On November 9th, Oswald was at the downtown Lincoln Mercury dealership where he gave his name to salesmen. Test drove a new car at excessive speeds and said he would soon have enough money to buy a new car. On November 16th, Oswald applied for a job at the Southland Hotel parking garage. Oswald asked how high the Southland building was and if it had a good view of downtown Dallas. A rifle with a scope, ammunition, target practice, a tall building from which to shoot the president, and enough money within a few weeks to buy a new car. The framing of Harvey as the assassin was nearly complete. A few days before the assassination, Mr. W.M. Haney was in Juarez, Mexico, preparing to drive to Fort Worth for medical treatment. He was asked if he would mind giving a ride to a young man named Lee Oswald. Haney agreed, providing the young man would drive, since Haney was using medication. En route to Fort Worth, Oswald told Haney he'd recently been in Mexico City. Oswald spoke of his two children, the book company, and Jack Ruby's honky-tonk, which he said he was tired of cleaning. Dorothy Markham, Ruby's girlfriend, corroborated Lee Oswald working for Ruby in 1963 in the summer. Haney said during the trip from El Paso to Fort Worth, Oswald used a telephone at nearly every stop. Now, Abilene, Texas is a little over halfway from El Paso, Juarez to Fort Worth. On November 17th, a note had been slipped under the apartment door of Harold Reynolds, a photographer. The note had been intended for his neighbor, Pedro Valeriano Gonzalez, president of the Cuban Liberation Committee. The note read, "Call me immediately, urgent." 2 Dallas phone numbers were given. The note was signed Lee Oswald. Reynolds gave the note to Gonzalez, who was quite nervous when he saw it. Although he had a phone in his apartment, Gonzalez proceeded directly to a payphone to call Dallas. Reynolds reported that he had seen a man who looked like Lee Harvey Oswald with an older man from New Orleans at Gonzalez's apartment. After the assassination, Gonzalez fled to Venezuela. On November 20th, a man waited in a car at the Redbird Airport, 6 miles south of Oak Cliff. His companion spoke with Wayne January about a charter flight to the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico on Friday, November 22nd. After the assassination, January said he was quite sure the man in the car was Oswald. Morning of November 20th, Mary Dowling waited on Lee Oswald at the Dobbs House restaurant at 10 a.m. He was unsatisfied with his order and cursed at her while police officer J.D. Tippet looked on. Dolores Harrison, manager Sam Rogers, and employee Douglas Leaks remembered Oswald as a regular coffee customer. They were not interviewed by the Warren Commission because their testimony would have placed Oswald at the Dobbs House on November 20th instead of at the book depository. A half hour later, at 10:30, Oswald was picked up at the Beckley Street entrance to the R.L. Thornton Expressway, less than a mile from the Dobbs House. While hitchhiking, he introduced himself to the driver as Lee Harvey Oswald and was carrying a 4-foot-long package wrapped in brown paper. He told the driver, Mr. Gates, it contained curtain rods, and discussed the president's visit. Mr. Yates dropped Oswald off across the street from the book depository. Upon returning to work, Mr. Yates told a fellow employee, Dempsey Jones, about the person he picked up in Oak Cliff and dropped off at the corner of Elm and Houston. The FBI gave Yates a polygraph test. When the results failed to discredit Yates, the Bureau called the tests inconclusive. Also on November 20th, a package was mailed from Irving, Texas to Lee Oswald at 2515 West 5th. On Thursday, Oswald rode to the Paynes with fellow employee Wesley Frazier. Oswald said he wanted to pick up some curtain rods Mrs. Payne had left for him. The package mailed on Wednesday had not been delivered. There was 12 cents due on the package, and it was held at the Irving Post Office. A notice of attempted delivery was received by Ruth Payne and turned over to the FBI. They picked up the package prior to the Dallas police searching the Payne residence on the 23rd. The package, opened by U.S. Postal Inspector Harry Holmes, contained, quote, a large brown bag open at both ends, similar to the brown bag that was used, allegedly found by Dallas police in the book depository. And we know Wesley Frazier and his sister allegedly saw Oswald place a brown bag in Frazier's car and carry the bag into the book depository the morning of the assassination. Yet no one else saw Oswald carry a bag into the book depository. The Dallas police found a brown bag on the 6th floor, which allegedly was used to carry the rifle into the building, but no fingerprints were found on that bag. Nor were fingerprints found in the brown bag mailed to Oswald's Payne residence. If the package containing the brown bag would have had the correct amount of postage, it would have been delivered to the Payne residence. Oswald would have opened the package and unwittingly placed his fingerprints on the brown bag, a bag that could have been conveniently placed on the 6th floor of the book depository. The expected delivery of a package containing curtain rods could have been the reason for Oswald's uncharacteristic trip to Irving on Thursday evening. Anybody want to stretch? Just a couple of minutes. We're running short again on time. But if you can't get a hold of me, there's this fellow here. He can hardly speak English. His name's Malcolm Blunt. Would you please stand? This fellow knows just darn near as much as I do about my presentation. You ask him, he'll probably give you the answers. Okay. On November 22nd, Harvey Oswald left a wallet, wedding ring, and $180 on the dresser at the Payne residence. He arrived at the book depository at 8 o'clock. An hour later, Lee Oswald was seen at the Top 10 Records near the Texas Theater, where he purchased a ticket. Lee Oswald returned a short time later and purchased a second ticket. This time, Officer J.D. Tippet was in the store. 2 hours later, Lee Oswald purchased 2 bottles of beer from a Jiffy store in downtown Dallas, returning a half an hour later to buy peanut butter. When asked for identification, he showed store clerk Fred Moore a Texas driver's license with the name Lee Oswald. Moore remembered Oswald's birth date as October 1939. 15 minutes before the assassination, Arnold Rowland saw 2 men, one of them wearing a white shirt and holding a rifle, in the far west window of the book depository. This window is at the opposite end of the building from the window from which Oswald was supposed to have fired. At this time, Harvey Oswald told the Dallas police he was eating in the lunchroom. Jack Ruby had telephoned a friend and asked if he would like to watch the fireworks. Unknown to Ruby, his friend was an informant for the Criminal Intelligence Division of the Internal Revenue Service. He and Ruby were standing at the corner of the Postal Annex building at the time of the shooting. Minutes later, Phil Willis, who also knew Jack Ruby, saw and photographed Ruby near the front of the school book depository. Across the street, 4 young women were watching the events. They worked at a sewing room in the Daltex building and knew Oswald. They said he spoke Spanish well and ate with them in a nearby restaurant. They also were acquainted with Jack Ruby, who they observed walking up and down the street near the book depository after the assassination. When Oswald came out, these 4 women saw Ruby give Oswald a pistol. Even though they reported this to the FBI, it was never followed up with the FBI, as there are no known interviews with these girls, or was Ruby ever questioned about this. The Warren Commission tells us Oswald picked up his pistol from his room at Beckley. Bernardine Roberts said when she cleaned his room, she never saw a pistol or a holster that was found with the Dallas police. We know Harvey Oswald had a pistol and attempted to fire it in the Texas Theater during his arrest. Officer McDonald, Officer Charles Walker, Officer Hudson, and other police officers heard the gun snap and it failed to fire. The snap of the gun was heard by theater patrons, including John Gibson. Officer Gerald Hill, who took possession of the pistol at Dallas Police Headquarters, reported that one of the shells had a hammer mark on the primer. An FBI report states that the firing pin of Oswald's rifle was bent. If Oswald's gun failed to fire in the Texas Theater, then why would that gun be expected to fire and kill Officer Tippet? Shell casings from the Tippet shooting were found and given to the Dallas police officer Poe shortly after Tippet was shot. Poe placed his initials on the inside of the empty shell casings. When the shell casings were shown to him 6 months later by FBI agent Bardwell Odom, Poe refused to identify them as the shell casings given to him at the scene of the Tippet murder. His shells were not on the inside of the casings. Different shells, fired from a different pistol. Now, if the information provided by the IRS informant, Phil Willis, and Mrs. Lopez's daughter and co-workers is accurate, it is possible Jack Ruby was in Dealey Plaza at the time of the shooting and gave Harvey Oswald a pistol with a bent firing pin. If such a pistol was given to Oswald by Jack Ruby, then Ruby's most certainly participated in and was knowledgeable of the conspiracy. Ruby knew more about Oswald the evening of the assassination than did members of the press or District Attorney Henry Wade. When Wade said that Oswald was a member of the Free Cuba Committee, it was Jack Ruby who corrected Wade by saying, "Fair play for Cuba Committee." A person wearing we're going to get into Tippet shooting, and I want you to understand something. In my view of this, there's two people, white shirt, brown shirt, and you can follow them from the depository to Oak Cliff. A person wearing a light-colored shirt, probably Lee Oswald, was seen by Arnold Rowland at the west end window of the 6th floor of the book depository 15 minutes before the assassination. Another person described as a heavy-set man wearing a hat, tan sport coat, and horn-rimmed glasses was seen by Richard Carr looking out of a window on the top floor of the book depository. Minutes later, James Worrell saw a person described as 5'10", wearing some sort of coat, leave the rear of the book depository heading south on Houston. Richard Carr saw the man he had seen on the top floor of the book depository walk south on Houston, turn east on Commerce, and get into a Nash Rambler station wagon. This car was parked in the corner of Commerce and Record. The Nash Rambler station wagon was next seen in front of the book depository by Deputy Sheriff Roger Craig. Craig saw a person wearing a light-colored, short-sleeved shirt, who he later identified as Oswald, getting into the station wagon and then traveled into the triple overpass towards Oak Cliff. Marvin Robinson was driving his Cadillac when the station wagon in front of him abruptly stopped in front of the book depository. A young man walked down the grassy incline and got into the vehicle, which sped away under the triple overpass. A third witness, Roy Cooper, was behind Marvin Robinson's Cadillac. He observed a white male wave at, enter, and leave in the station wagon. Deputy Sheriff Roger Craig was observed in a photo taken by Jim Murray that shows this short-sleeved man in a white-colored shirt head towards an Rambler station wagon in front of the book depository. The Hertz sign on top of the book depository shows the time at 12:40. The man in the white shirt, probably Lee Oswald, jumped into the station wagon which sped towards Oak Cliff. Roy Truly, minutes after the assassination, saw Harvey Oswald in the lunchroom. Oswald spoke to a reporter on his way out the front door. He may have been given a defective pistol by Jack Ruby, as witnessed by the girls. Harvey Oswald then walked 7 blocks east on Elm Street, where he boarded a city bus, which would have taken him to Oak Cliff. He rode the bus a few blocks towards the book depository until the bus became caught up in traffic. Harvey obtained a bus transfer, later found with the police, left the bus, and walked south on Lamar. William Whaley saw a man wearing a brown shirt walk toward his cab on Lamar Street. Whaley took his passenger, who he later identified as Oswald, to Oak Cliff via the Houston Street Viaduct. Across the river, 5 witnesses saw J.D. Tippet arrive at the Gloco station at 12:45. He sat in his car and watched traffic cross the bridge from Dallas for about 10 minutes. There were no police dispatches ordering Tippet to this location. If Tippet was not somehow involved, what was he doing there? Oswald crossed the Houston Viaduct about 12:52 and passed in front of the Gloco station. Within a minute or two, around 12:52, Tippet sped south on Lancaster. 2 minutes later, at 12:54, Tippet answered his dispatcher and said he was at 8th and Lancaster, a mile south of the Gloco station. He turned right on Jefferson Boulevard and stopped at the Top 10 record store for a few minutes before 1 and used the telephone. He left the store, sped across Jefferson to Sunset, ran a stop sign, and turned right. Do you folks follow that, or should I use the pointer?
Use the pointer. Use the pointer.
Let's see if I can do this. There's the Gloco station. There's the Houston Viaduct. In the cab, Harvey's riding down here. He passes Tippet, comes down here, gets let off about 12:54 out of the cab. Tippet leaves here, speeds south on Lancaster. At 12:54, Tippet is here. That's the police report. Tippet goes down to the Top 10 record store, parks his car on the corner, goes in and makes a phone call. Harvey's walking towards the rooming house. Harvey's last seen, 103, 104, 105, somewhere around there, standing at the corner bus stop. Tippet's last seen a few minutes after 1, right here. Now, I have traveled this route in my car many times. It's about a 2-minute drive. I don't know, I don't think anybody ever will, if Tippet was the person outside of the rooming house honking his horn and taking Oswald back to the theater. I do know that Tippet disappeared for about 10 minutes. And this distance here, from where he was last seen and where he was shot, is a 1.5-minute drive. It's just a few blocks. So Tippet disappears somewhere for 10 minutes. Somehow Harvey gets from here to the Texas Theater without being seen, because he's there about 10 minutes after 1. Now Whaley let Harvey Oswald off near the corner of Neely and Beckley a few minutes before 1. Oswald walked to his rooming house, arriving shortly after 1. While inside, a Dallas police car drove by slowly and honked the horn twice. If it was not Tippet, who was it? All other Dallas police cars were accounted for. Harvey Oswald left the rooming house and was last seen at the corner of Zhang and Beckley by Early and Roberts about 1:04. During the next few minutes, Oswald managed to get to the Texas Theater over a mile away without being seen by anyone. The only explanation that makes sense is that he was driven to the theater, maybe by Tippet. Butch Burroughs, the employee of the Texas Theater, heard someone enter the theater shortly after 1 and go to the balcony. According to Burroughs, Julia Postal sold this man a ticket. 1:15, Harvey Oswald came down from the balcony and bought popcorn from Butch Burroughs. He was seen by theater patron George Aplin. Harvey, wearing a brown shirt, walked into the lower level and sat next to Jack Davis during the opening credits of the first movie, which began at 1:20. A few minutes later, Harvey moved across the aisle and sat next to a pregnant woman. 15 minutes later, just before the police arrived, the pregnant woman went to the balcony and was never seen again. Harvey remained in the same seat until his arrest. Now we followed the movements of the man wearing the brown shirt, Harvey, from the book depository, bus, cab, rooming house, Texas Theater. What about Lee Oswald, the man wearing the white shirt who left Dealey Plaza in the Rambler station wagon and was last seen heading towards Oak Cliff at 12:40? Lee Oswald is first seen by Mr. Clark, hurrying past the 10th Street Barber Shop. This is a block from Jack Ruby's apartment. William Lawrence Smith. Now, many of you have heard of the William Smith. Folks, there's two William Smiths that saw Oswald. They were right across the street from each other. William Arthur Smith, William Lawrence Smith. William Lawrence Smith left his construction job shortly after 1 o'clock. On his way towards the Town and Country Cafe, he passed a man who he identified as Oswald walking west. He said this person was wearing a light-colored shirt and jacket. Now, once again, this is key. Light-colored shirt and jacket. where Tippet was shot. This is where Smith was working on his construction job. He's walking this way to the Town and Country Cafe here. Lee Oswald was walking this way, down 10th Street. This is Jack Ruby's apartment, block and a half away from where Oswald was first seen. First seen at the 10th Street barbershop, then seen by William Lawrence Smith, who's walking east to this cafe right here. Oswald walks this way, down here, and encounters Tippet. William Lawrence Smith left his construction job shortly after 1. On his way to the Town and Country Cafe, he passed a man who had identified as Oswald walking west. Lee Oswald, which is left on the screen. Lee Oswald, wearing a light-colored shirt and jacket, is next seen walking west by William Arthur Smith at 10th and Denver. Cab driver Scoggins sees Oswald walking west as Tippett's patrol car passed slowly in front of him. Jack Tatum, in his red Ford Galaxy, drove past Tippet, who was talking to a man through the passenger side car window. Tatum said the man was wearing a white t-shirt, white jacket, and had his hands in his pockets. Several car lengths behind Tatum was Domingo Benavides in his 58 Chevrolet pickup, some 15 feet from Tippet's police car. Helen Markham was on the corner, 100 feet away. Tatum, Benavides, Markham saw the young man walk up to the police car. When Tippet got out of the car, the men walked around to the front of the car and shot him. Benavides ducked under the dash of his truck, and Markham fell to her knees and began screaming. Jack Tatum watched the gunman walk to the rear of the police car, turn and walk along the driver's side of the car and shoot Tippet in the head. William Arthur Smith and Jimmy Burt jumped in Burt's 52 blue Ford and drove to the scene of the shooting. Burt got out of the car in time to see Tippett's assailant walking south on Patton. Frank Wright, his wife, had killed Clemens, heard shots and saw the assailant leave the scene. Wright's wife called the police to report the shooting. Helen Markham said the shooting was at 1:06 prior to the arrival of her bus at 1:12. Mr. Bollig, driving west on 10th Street, arrived at the scene at 1:10, according to his watch. He used Tippett's radio to report the shooting. Now look, the time of the transmission on a police report that we have found, and we're not, is 1:10. It was crossed out and changed. The Warren report is listing it as 1:19. We need to do some more work on that. The time of the next police broadcast on the sheet that we found is also crossed out and changed. From this, the Tippet shooting could have been as early as 1:10 or as late as 1:15. We just don't know. The Warren Commission placed the time at 1:16, as late as possible, to give Oswald enough time to make it from 1026 Beckley to the Tippet shooting. Tippett's body was en route to the hospital by the time the Dallas police arrived. Dallas police officer Westbrook found Oswald's brown wallet next to where Tippet had fallen and showed it to FBI agent Barrett. That seems unbelievable that a man would leave his wallet next to a policeman he's just shot. But Barrett insists Oswald's wallet was found at the Tippet murder scene. If Tippet's assailant was the man who impersonated Harvey Oswald for the previous 2 months, then the wallet was intentionally left at the scene of the Tippet shooting. This was Lee Oswald's last act of setting Harvey up as the patsy. If so, it left Lee with no identification. Oswald walked south on Patton, and he passed it within 60 feet of Ted Calloway. I have a short clip of Calloway. Could you turn the...
Either a real light tan or a light gray, Eisenhower type windbreaker. Complexion, dark hair, and I found out later in reading he had such fair complexion that he'd killed a police officer. He scared to death, so what it was, he was pale as a ghost.
Calloway said Oswald, the person he saw, had a white shirt and a white Eisenhower jacket. Oswald turned west on Jefferson and passed Mary Brock, who described him as wearing light clothing. The police broadcasting Tippet's killer described him as a white male, 5'8", black hair, wearing a white jacket and white shirt. Oswald passed Hardy's shoe store and slipped into the Texas Theater. Julia Postal, the cashier, called the police. Police broadcast reported the suspect in the balcony of the Texas Theater. When the police arrived, they were told by a young female, probably Julia Postal, the man was in the balcony. All police who entered the front of the theater went to the balcony. They were questioning a young man when more police entered the main floor of the theater from the rear entrance. They were looking for a man in a white shirt and white jacket in the balcony, but they arrested a man on the main floor wearing a brown shirt. Captain Westbrook told the officers to, quote, "Get him out of here as fast as you can and don't let anybody see him," end quote. Harvey Oswald was brought out the front entrance, placed in the police car, and escorted to jail. The police homicide report of Tippett's murder read, "Suspect was arrested in the balcony of the Texas Theater at 231 West Jefferson." Detective Stringfellow's report states Oswald was arrested in the balcony of the Texas Theater, but the man in the balcony was not arrested. He may have been escorted out of the rear of the theater and driven away in a police car. Bernard Hare, owner of the hobby shop 2 doors from the theater, witnessed this event.
I couldn't see much from where I was, and I couldn't get too far away from the store, so I went out the back door. And as soon as I opened the back door, there was another squad car parked, and a policeman there with a shotgun and a scope. And I hesitated, and then I came out, and another squad car lined up all the way up the mountain. I looked up, and there was a policeman on the fire escape, another on the building. So I walked a little bit closer, being careful, nobody would tell me to stay back. And I got back there almost even into the Texas Theater, which while I was standing around watching, waiting, when I saw him bring somebody out in the back. It looked as if it was a prisoner because he was very flushed in the face. He wasn't dressed like the rest of the police officers. And one police officer was very close to his left side, and others were walking near, following him to the squad car. I was trying to see if they had handcuffs on him, but I couldn't see his hands good enough. I don't think that he had handcuffs on him. But they put him in the car, and it just gave me the impression that he was a prisoner. And I watched him drive off, they turned right to Madison, and back outside. That's all I saw.
For all these years, you thought you had witnessed the arrest of Lee Harvey Oswald?
I just assumed that I didn't know at the time anything about Lee Harvey Oswald, but later on as the story developed and I learned more about it, I said, then they took out the back of the theater. And I was surprised years later, here recently, to find out there's a picture of Lee Harvey Oswald going out the front. I have no idea. Maybe it was a police officer, plainclothesman, who got the scrap with him inside. I don't know. They couldn't take him to the hospital.
Was this fellow wearing a suit and a tie and a cover, or was he in some kind of uniform?
It looked like he was in a suit. Full of a shirt and jeans.
Can you describe him as best you can? I know
He was, I guess, medium build and kind of slender. He wasn't heavy set at all. Main thing I remember about it is flush in the face, like he'd been in a scrap.
Of course, I'm sure as all the publicity developed, you then, of course, saw a lot of pictures of Lee Harvey Oswald.
Yeah, the pictures that I saw of Lee Harvey Oswald looked like he'd been about the same size as this guy.
For 25 years, Mr. Hare and other witnesses thought they had witnessed the arrest of Oswald. Who was this person, if not Lee Oswald? 3 police officers were directed to obtain the names and addresses of all theater patrons, but no list exists. No police report, record of arrest, nor mention of any person taken from the rear of the theater. Just after 2 o'clock, Mr. T.F. White, after 2 o'clock, Oswald was taken to the Dallas jail. Just after 2 o'clock, Mr. T.F. White observed a man sitting in a red Ford Falcon with the engine running in the El Chico parking lot behind his garage. As Mr. White approached the car, the driver sped off in a westerly direction on Davis Street. Mr. White, who later saw Oswald's picture on TV, said the man was identical to Oswald and wore a white T-shirt. This Oswald sighting shortly after Harvey's arrest at the Texas Theater could have been a case of mistaken identity, but Mr. White wrote down the license plate number of the vehicle. The plates belonged to a blue 1957 Plymouth, not a red Ford Falcon. The Plymouth belonged to Carl Mather, a longtime employee of Collins Radio and a close friend of J.D. Tippet. Newsman and former Dallas Mayor Wes Wise heard of the unusual Oswald sighting. Mr. Wise questioned Mather about the incident. Mather was so nervous he could hardly talk and said little. In 1977, the House Select Committee wanted to interview Mather about this incident. He agreed, but not before he was granted immunity from prosecution. Several HSCA documents regarding this incident remain classified in the National Archives. Harvey Oswald, arrested in a brown shirt, was taken out of the front of the theater and driven to the police station. But not a single witness described Tippet's killer as wearing a brown shirt until 4 months later. Some witnesses identified Harvey as Tippet's killer, some did not. Once again, witnesses had difficulty recognizing the difference between Lee and Harvey Oswald. The same problem Laurel Kittrell had when she interviewed both Oswalds at the Texas Employment Commission a month earlier. Oswald and Tippet were seen at the Dobbs House, Top 10 record store at the same time. Tippet was at the Gloco station when Oswald's cab crossed the Houston Street Bridge. Tippet spoke to and was shot by Oswald. License plates from the car of Tippet's close friend Carl Mather, seen on a car driven by Oswald shortly after the assassination. There are either a lot of Oswald-Tippet coincidences, or Tippet was somehow involved. Lee Oswald's driver's license may have been found in the wallet left at the Tippet shooting. The same driver's license showed to store clerk Fred Moore hours earlier when Oswald bought 2 beers. A Texas driver's license belonging to Lee Oswald turned up at the Texas Department of Public Safety the following week. Aletha Frere and 6 employees of the Texas Department of Public Safety saw and handled Oswald's Texas driver's license. It was dirty and worn as though it had been carried in a billfold. Mrs. Lee Bozard stated she knew from direct personal experience that there was a Texas driver's license file for Lee Harvey Oswald. The file had been pulled shortly after the assassination. Lee Oswald had a Texas driver's license. Harvey Oswald did not have a license. Worldwide attention centered on Harvey Oswald after his arrest, when he said, "Now everyone will know who I am." He knew his work as an undercover informant was finished. Former FBI agent Gaten Carver said Oswald was being paid by the FBI as a PSI, potential security informant. Harvey Oswald, sitting in the Dallas jail, now had both the CIA and the FBI desperately trying to distance themselves from him, link him with Castro and/or Cuba, frame him for the assassination, hide his identity, and create a legend that portrayed him as a lone nut. 1 hour after Oswald's arrest, Hoover wrote, "Oswald made several trips to Cuba. Upon his return each time, we interviewed him about what he went to Cuba for, and he answered it was none of our business." If the FBI interviewed Oswald each time he returned from Cuba, where are these interviews? His 1961 trip to Cuba, known to Army intelligence, would conflict with Harvey Oswald in Russia at the same time. That one interview would prove the FBI was aware of 2 Oswalds. If, on the other hand, these interviews mentioned by Hoover were fictitious, then the FBI director is maliciously attempting to link Oswald to Cuba an hour after his arrest. The director of Central Intelligence sent a message to Mexico City stating, quote, "Headquarters has received a report that on the day of President Kennedy's assassination, Cubana aircraft delayed its departure at Mexico City 5 hours, awaiting important passenger who arrived from Mexico City Airport at 21:30 hours Mexican time." This message is simply a hoax. Another attempt to link Cuba to the assassination, this time from CIA headquarters. A rumor surfaced that Jack Ruby met with Fidel Castro to discuss the murder as well as smuggling of drugs and weapons. This lie, as well as others, originated with former South Florida CIA operative Frank Sturgis, a longtime friend and associate of David Phillips, Howard Hunt, and their CIA collaborators from the Florida swamps. With FBI memos, CIA dispatches, letters with no return addresses, newspaper articles, rumors and false leads running rampant, it seemed like everyone was trying to blame Oswald and link him to Cuba, both before and after the assassination. The framing of Harvey Oswald had worked. In his own words, Harvey told us, "I'm just a patsy." Lee Oswald was not in jail. In the early morning hours of November 23rd, 12 hours after the assassination, Mary Lawrence was working at the B&B restaurant, 2 doors from Jack Ruby's Vegas Club. She was the head waitress and had known Jack Ruby for 8 years. She and the night cashier saw Ruby and a person identical to Lee Harvey Oswald in the restaurant shortly after midnight. She reported this to the Dallas police and received a phone call on December 3rd from an unknown male who stated, "If you don't want to die, you better get out of town." When questioned by the Dallas police, Mary Lawrence stated that the man with Ruby was positively Lee Harvey Oswald. Neither Mary Lawrence nor her friend were questioned by the Warren Commission. Because 2 Oswalds and their connections to the intelligence community had to be contained, the Strickland Junior High School records disappeared within hours. Employment and wage records from Dolly Shoe 2 Jackson Pfisters vanished, replaced with forged W-2 forms. Oswald's driver's license and file disappeared. Oswald and his mother's tax returns were classified. Witnesses whose testimony conflicted with Oswald's official whereabouts were ignored. But Oswald's possessions, confiscated by the Dallas police, caused problems, particularly a Minox spy camera. The Dallas police photographed Oswald's possessions, including the Minox spy camera in the case. The FBI did not want to explain what a poor laborer like Oswald was doing with a spy camera. So the FBI developed the film and produced a print that was unrecognizable.
2 minutes.
If I need the slide. They rephotographed the items and produced a good quality print, but the Minox was gone. It was replaced with a Minox light meter. They then coerced the Dallas Police Department into changing their property invoice forms from a camera to a light meter. But with a Minox camera and Minox film also listed in Dallas Police inventory, there had to be a camera. 2 months later, Michael Payne conveniently produced this Minox camera to the FBI. This camera was returned to the Paynes in June of '64. In a television interview of PBS show Frontline, Michael Payne confirmed the FBI returning this Minox camera. He further stated that all of his photographic equipment was stolen 5 years after the assassination. Michael Payne's camera was gone, but the National Archives still has the Minox camera available for public inspection. It was photographed in October 1997 by researcher Malcolm Blunt. Slide, please. That's your Minox camera, still in the National Archives. Well, Deborah says I got a couple of minutes, and I still have about 6 or 7 pages to go. To keep it.
Let's ask Peter Lipscomb if it's okay, because he has to speak.
Thank you. The FBI sent the. Flip one more slide, please. All right.
I'm still looking at the camera.
The FBI sent the Minox film to their laboratory and requested a comparison of Minox film recovered from possessions of Lee Harvey Oswald with Minox film located in an FBI file to see if the films were exposed with the same camera. The New York file is marked LOC-FAB, Location Foreign Agent Bureau. It is also marked ESPR, Espionage Russia. Someone in the FBI suspected that film found in the Payne's garage in Irving, Texas, may have been exposed in the same camera as film in an espionage file in New York. Harvey Oswald, double-crossed and sitting in jail, posed a grave danger. This problem was eliminated when Jack Ruby killed Harvey 2 days after the assassination. Mortician Paul Grudy was asked twice if he noticed a mastoidectomy scar on the left side of Oswald's neck from a 1945 operation, or scars near Oswald's left elbow from the self-inflicted gunshot wound in 1957. Grudy noticed no scars. To keep investigative agencies from involving themselves with Kennedy's murder and learning the truth, LBJ placed the investigation under control of the FBI and his longtime friend Hoover. The Warren Commission was created to prevent a serious investigation from taking place. 2 days after the assassination, the FBI was all but finished. Subsequent investigation will either support the Warren Commission report or be ignored. Now, a few people in the FBI and the Warren Commission knew about the Oswald problem, and they knew how to handle it. The task of acquiring background information on Marguerite and Lee Oswald was assigned to Warren Commission staff attorney John Ely. His report was given to Warren Commission Attorney Jenner. Jenner then wrote to Chief Counsel Lee Rankin, telling him that the background information, right slide please, telling him that the background information on Marguerite and Lee Oswald would require material alteration and in some cases omission. Mr. Eady's original memoranda and notes are missing from the National Archives. Other background information on Marguerite and Lee is missing as well. This master list of Warren Commission exhibits lists all commission documents. The New York School court records and documents relating to Oswald's family history from 1953 are marked FBI, missing, legal or has, indicating that the missing documents were last known to be in the Warren Commission legaler's possession. This withdrawal card shows biographical information on Lee Harvey Oswald has been restricted by the CIA. Government officials who tried to check into Oswald's background, such as State Department Security Investigator Arnold Tippet, were reassigned or removed from their jobs. James Wilcott, a former CIA finance officer, told the House Select Committee Lee Oswald had been recruited from the military by the CIA with the express purpose of a double agent assignment in the USSR. His testimony was ignored. In a telephone call recorded by the FBI, Michael Payne said to his wife, "We both know who's responsible for this." This potentially explosive admission was never followed up by the FBI or Warren Commission. The first 6 pages of this 7-page memo were redacted. The last page says, if there were some question about the identity, let's slide forward, I think. Nope, back. Okay. If there were, this is the 7th page of a memo. The first 6 are all completely blanked out. This last page on the right says if there was some question about the identity of Oswald, it would seem that this question would have been raised by Oswald's mother. Someone was questioning Oswald's identity, but they didn't realize that Marguerite not only knew, but participated in Lee and Harvey Oswald's scheme for years. Robert Oswald knew. He lied to the Warren Commission and kept silent. John Pitt knew, told the truth to the Warren Commission, and was ignored. Robert Oswald provided many damaging and misleading statements about Lee Oswald, which supported the government's conclusion of Oswald's guilt. Many of Robert's stories and parts of his testimony before the Warren Commission were fabrications. Robert said, one of Lee's favorite programs was I Led 3 Lives, the story of Herbert Philbrook, the FBI informant who posed as a communist spy. Lee watched that show every week without fail. When I left home to join the Marines, he was still watching the reruns. That was July 1952. I Led 3 Lives is often mentioned to suggest that Oswald had a vivid and fanciful imagination and was out of touch with reality. But in this case, it was Robert Oswald who was out of touch with reality. This TV program first aired in September '53, a year and 2 months after Robert left home and joined the Marines. Even physical evidence provided by Robert, such as the Imperial Reflex camera allegedly used to take the backyard photos, was suspect. It was not provided until 3 months after the assassination. Adding to the rumors was Robert Blakey, former attorney for the House Select Committee. Blakey's been trying to sell the public on the idea that organized crime killed Kennedy for the past 20 years. Blakey says that because Oswald was raised by his uncle, who had ties to organized crime, Oswald also had ties to organized crime in New Orleans. Let's set the record straight. Lee Oswald was in the care of his aunt and his uncle, Lillian and Dutz Moret, between the ages of 1 and 2, while Marguerite was working. From ages 3 to 5, he was placed in the Bethlehem Orphans Asylum. From age 6 to 12, he was in Dallas-Fort Worth. 12 to 14, he was in New York. The only time Lee Oswald could have been raised by his uncle was between the ages of 1 and 2. Robert Blakey's assertions that organized crime killed Kennedy are as worthless as his statements connecting 2-year-old Oswald to organized crime. Warren Commission members Hale Boggs and Richard Russell suspected a conspiracy. Boggs advocated reopening the investigation. However, before he was able to introduce a bill reopening the case, he and Alaska Senator Nick Begich disappeared on a flight from Anchorage to Juneau. In 1964, Richard Russell asked Colonel Philip Corso to quietly conduct an investigation into the Oswald matter. Corso soon reported to Senator Russell there had been 2 passports issued to Lee Oswald used by 2 different men. He obtained his information from Francis Knight, head of the U.S. Passport Office. He also reported to Senator Russell there were 2 birth certificates in the name of Lee Harvey Oswald. They'd been used by 2 different people. This information came from William Sullivan, head of the FBI's Domestic Intelligence Division. Corso Russell concluded the assassination had been a conspiracy. Russell tried to resign, but LBJ refused. A frustrated Russell stopped going to Warren Commission meetings. 6 years later, Russell spoke out and said he thought there had been a criminal conspiracy behind Kennedy's murder. Russell felt the FBI had deceived the commission in 2 areas. One, ballistics. The other, Oswald's background. Russell was correct. The FBI had withheld information that could have exposed Oswald's dual identity. The New York and Strickland school records, the original W-2 forms, the dozens of reports of Lee Oswald in the United States while Harvey was in Russia could have been given to the Warren Commission. This letter could have caused them to investigate. Slide left. Oh, slide right, sorry. This letter could have caused them to investigate rather than speculate about the origin of Oswald's Russian-speaking ability. Professor Vladimir Petrov, head of the Slavic Language Department of Yale, studied a letter Oswald wrote to Senator John Tower. Petrov said, quote, "The person who wrote the letter was a native-speaking Russian with an imperfect knowledge of the English language." This could explain Oswald's grammatically incorrect English as well as his exceptional command of the Russian language. Without this type of information, Warren Commission members were left to speculate when they encountered problems with Oswald's background. The Warren Commission took altered and misleading information from the lives of Lee Oswald and Harvey Oswald and created the legend of Lee Harvey Oswald. Authors such as Priscilla Johnson, Marguerite Oswald, Gerald Ford, and Robert Oswald promoted this legend. The story of Lee Harvey Oswald was so etched in the public's mind that the stage was set for the Warren Commission critics to investigate everything but Oswald. In reality, the focus should have been on Oswald from the beginning. 4 years later, Garrison and his staff realized the discrepancies. Investigator Alberto Fowler told Carlos Bringauer that Garrison had information that an identical double of Oswald existed, and this individual was a double agent of the FBI. In this memo to Lou Ivon, Garrison writes, "If you really want to know what I think, it's that Robert Oswald knew this returning defector was not really Lee. And that's what Robert's problem was the night of the assassination, when he found it necessary to take such a long drive to think things out. He knew things were far more complicated than they appeared on the surface. If the returning defector was not Robert's brother, then Robert is not the uncle of June and Rachel Oswald. This could explain why neither June nor Rachel have ever met, spoken to, received correspondence from Robert Oswald. In 34 years, no communication whatsoever from Uncle Robert. Things get complicated when one person is substituted for another. Now you can understand why documents and files related to Lee Oswald are still classified. There are nearly as many classified documents on Marguerite as there are on Clay Shaw, George de Warrenshield, Michael Payne, and Ruth Payne, and David Ferry, people with suspected ties to our government intelligence agencies. There was much more to Marguerite than simply the mother of the alleged assassin. Jack Ruby's tax returns were published in the Warren volumes, while Marguerite and Lee Oswald's tax returns remained classified. When the ARRB was created in 1992, tax returns were specifically exempted from public disclosure. Why? Because the wages and employment shown on Oswald's tax returns would not match the Warren Commission of their employment. Marina Oswald has the authority to release Lee Oswald's tax returns, but has consistently refused to do so. Why? What reason could she possibly have for refusing to release 40-year-old tax returns? Because Marina may have known. She insisted on seeing Oswald's body during his autopsy. Marina entered the room, stood next to the body of Lee Harvey Oswald, and did a most curious thing. She raised his eyelids, and she looked into his eyes. 4 months later, she told a French journalist, "I had 2 husbands, Lee, the father of my children, an affectionate and kind man, and Harvey Oswald, the assassin of President Kennedy." If this statement is true, then Marina knows enough about Harvey and Lee not to release the tax returns. Both Marguerite and Lee's income tax returns are marked classified and unavailable to the public. So are the income tax returns of John and Minnie Smith for the same years. The names of John and Minnie Smith could not be found anywhere in the world of the Kennedy assassination, not in the National Archives, the Warren Commission documents, HSCA files, anywhere. The only documents relating to John and Minnie Smith are the classified income tax returns in the National Archives master list of JFK documents. You just have to wonder if John and Minnie Smith are pseudonyms for the second Marguerite and Lee Oswald. Otherwise, who are these people, and what possible relevance do they or their tax returns have to the assassination? The release of the tax returns could expose Oswald's dual identity, created by the CIA, and thereby indict elements of the government in the assassination and its cover-up. The full extent of this cover-up remains hidden within classified documents at the National Archives. The next time you're confronted by supporters of the Warren Commission, ask them to explain the fake W-2s, the missing Strickland records, the 2 Minox cameras, the missing Dolly Shoe, 2-Jack, and Pfister employment records. Have them speak with Mr. Cudlady, Fran Schubert, Palmer McBride, William Wolfe, or former Strickland students. Ask them why documents and tax returns relating to Marguerite and Lee Oswald remain classified. Show them these photographs of Lee and Harvey Oswald. Slide, please. Most of the cover-up has to do with protecting the identity of Oswald. He was not created by the Mafia, the Cubans, the Russians, or the Dallas police. He was a creation of the CIA, years before the assassination. This Warren Commission exhibit appeared in newspapers at the time of Oswald's defection. When each half of Oswald's face is viewed separately, it is easy to see that this photo is a composite. Half of Harvey, half of Lee. This is Lee Harvey Oswald, created by the CIA, promoted by the Warren Commission. Now, exposing and understanding two Oswalds will not solve the Kennedy assassination, but it does give us insight into the capabilities of our intelligence operations. It allows us to understand why our government agencies concealed their knowledge and involvement with Oswald. It helps us understand why witness testimony was ignored, altered, and in some cases omitted. It helps us understand why evidence was altered and fabricated and destroyed. We finally realize why Harvey Oswald was not allowed to stand trial and had to be eliminated. After 34 years, many pieces to this puzzle are still missing. But if you understand who Harvey and Lee Oswald really were, and who created them, and who directed them, then you'll know who was responsible for the assassination of John Kennedy. That's it.
Absolutely brilliant performance, and I think we know what the definition of true intelligence is. We just saw it in operation. We want to announce J.P. Lancer as the textual version of what you just heard. There are only 18 this evening, but there will be 150 on sale tomorrow. The 18 are right now available, 150 tomorrow, and I think it's cheap. 40 full pages at $8. Thank you again, John Armstrong.
This is Palmer McBride. He's going to say a few words. Ask the man any questions you want to.
Well, hello, everyone. And I want to tell you that it's been an incredible experience. John has already given you some background of my knowing Oswald, so if you want to ask any questions, maybe I can help. So feel free.
Tell us about when you first met Oswald, what you knew about him, when it ended. Whatever you can remember. They want to hear it.
Okay, you know I worked at Pfister Dental Laboratory with Oswald, and he first came there in late '57,
Closer to the mic.
around after Sputnik. And as we were all members of the Amateur Rocket Society and New Orleans Amateur Astronomers Association, we're all into rocketry. when the Russians surprised the world with the launch of the first Earth satellite. And as probably many of you remember that at that time, it wasn't the satellite so much that shook up the American intelligence and military, but knowing that the Russians had a rocket big enough to drop a bomb on Texas or Los Angeles or Washington, D.C. And the occasion that my name appears in the Warren Report was when Oswald came to my house and we were discussing Russian space successes. And I said, I thought President Eisenhower wasn't doing enough for the space program. This is before the formation of NASA. And he said, quote, I would like to kill President Eisenhower because he exploits the American people, unquote. And I was astounded that he said this because he never seemed the type that would hurt a fly. And then he left Pfister. It must have been around July of '58. Maybe early July, late June, because I left Pfister on August 15th, 1958, when I went off to the Air Force Reserves at summer camp, when I came back to get another job in the aluminum company. Now, we got one letter from him from Fort Worth, and Mr. Williamson, the office manager of Pfister, read it and said he was selling shoes in Fort Worth, and he'd gotten some kind of demonstration at a local high school. Civil race riot or something like that, I don't know what. And that was the last I heard of Oswald until the evening of November 22nd, 1963, when in the Air Force, I came back from dinner, shower, and TV set in our room in the barracks, alleged assassin Lee Harvey Oswald. And I said, oh my God, that guy. So I called the Air Police. They sent a staff car over to get me, took me to the Air Police shack, and brought in Colonel Harry Palmer of Air Force Intelligence, and he took my deposition on what I knew of Oswald. And then, a few days later, when Oswald was killed, never heard another word. From the Air Force, FBI, nobody, until early 1969, Jim Garrison's man came down to Cape Canaveral to my apartment there, and he showed me about 6 or 7 pictures of people. He said, these people were involved in the assassination of President Kennedy. I said, well, that's the only one I recognize. That's Lee Harvey Oswald. And he said, you worked with him in Pfister and all this, you know? I said, yeah. I told him all about Pfister. And heard no more about it until John contacted me a few years ago. But I absolutely know that the time I knew Oswald was post-Sputnik, October 4th, 1957. No matter what the Warren Report says.
Any questions?
And what name did you personally use with you?
Lee Harvey Oswald.
All three.
I called him Lee. Everybody at Pfister called him Lee. And he was the one you see in the newsreels.
Palmer, did you go to his house?
Yes. There was the occasion where he went to the meeting of the New Orleans Amateur Astronomers Association. His house was right across the street from Pfister on Dauphine Street and above the Senator Hotel. We went in there and went in the door, and his mother was just coming out, and she said, like, I'm going to the grocery store, Lee will be back in a minute. He said, okay, Mom, I'll see you later. I'm going to Palmer's house. We're going to the Astronomy Club meeting. Then he showed me copies of Das Kapital and the Communist Manifesto, which he was quite proud of. Then we went off to my house, and from my house we went to William Wolfe's house, where he got into the confrontation with Wolfe's father over communism. Because Wolfe's father had been a tank officer in World War II in the Wehrmacht, the German army, and he hated the Russians. And him and Oswald got into a verbal fight, and he literally threw Oswald out of his house. Then we went on up to the meeting of the New Orleans Amateur Astronomers Association.
Where?
In Metairie, Louisiana, at the home of Walter Gerke, at 208 Hector Avenue.
How tall was the guy that you knew?
I'm this tall. He was about like this. A little shorter than me. Thin.
And you're about 5 what?
5'10" and a half.
You spoke Russian?
No. None of us did at that time.
Okay, let's take 3 more questions because we don't want to cut other people's
Yes, sir.
time.
Yeah, in the Warren Commission exhibit, it appears that you spoke to an FBI man.
I didn't know if I did. Yeah, go ahead.
In that, it was attributed to you. You said the man you knew resembled a photograph that was published in the Miami Herald, the one that had dark hair and a mustache. And I have never been able to find a picture in the Miami Herald showing a man with a mustache. Did you make that statement when you were interrogated?
I don't remember, because we did not have the Miami Herald on the base. We had the Orlando Sentinel and the Today newspapers in the machines on the base. And we used to get the paper and read it every day, right on the airplane, on the flight line, especially after the assassination.
Okay, this is our...
Mustache.
Yes, sir.
Sir, the follow-up was regarding the mustache?
He didn't mention a mustache.
No, not that I remember.
I read, I think in secondary sources, that the time when he said he wanted to kill Eisenhower, he also was praising Khrushchev.
Yes, correct? Khrushchev and the glories of communism, yes.
Okay, last question. Thank you very much.
Okay.